listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is time now for another edition of the most disruptive show covering news, politics, events, and more across our country, as well as across the divided surface of our globe. In the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, a burning ember in the darkness, your hoarse political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
I can hear that. You do not sound too great, man. I hope that gets better real soon here. Get him some lemon tea or something, Aisha. I'm just kidding. Let's get into the news. I hope you know what? I need to close this up. Jesus, pardon me. And that means you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. That really threw me for a loop. I'm sorry.
My bad.
Well, Jamarl,
My bad.
You're good. Hope everybody's having a good morning. Let's get into the headlines. First up in COVID news, at least 2,369 new coronavirus deaths and 66,714 new cases were reported yesterday in the United States. Over the past week, there has been an average of 64,409 new cases per day. That's a decrease of 17% from the average 2 weeks earlier. As of this morning, more than 28,804,000 people in the U.S. have been infected with the coronavirus, and over 518,000 have died from it. On Thursday, the World Health Organization said the number of cases in Europe is now rising after 6 weeks of decline. Last week, the number of cases rose 9% to just over 1 million. Authorities said they were seeing a resurgence in Central and Eastern Europe, with new cases also on the rise in Western Europe, where cases were already high. In national political news, the U.S. House of Representatives canceled a session scheduled for Thursday, for today, following law enforcement warnings of a possible plot by a militia group to breach the U.S. Capitol. The Capitol complex is ringed with non-scalable barbed wire topped 8-foot fences. It's still guarded by hundreds of National Guard members. As a result, the House moved the intended session to Wednesday night, in which they successfully passed H.R. 1, a sweeping government and elections reform bill. H.R. 1, known as the For the People Act, would overhaul government ethics and campaign finance laws and seek to strengthen voting rights by creating automatic voter registration and expanding access to early and absentee voting. The House also passed the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. That legislation would ban chokeholds and overhaul qualified immunity protections for law enforcement. And we'll be talking more about those. Those are, of course, going to the Senate. We'll be going over those in more depth soon. President Biden has agreed to lower the income cap for stimulus checks. Adults who earn less than $75,000 per year will still get the full $1,400 check. However, people who earn more than $80,000 will get nothing. I believe that previously it was scaled up to $100,000. So you had a $25,000 window. Now it's a $5,000 window. The House passed the bill last week. We'll have to ratify those changes. Other changes include scrapping a $15 federal minimum wage, $140 million for a California rail project, and $1.5 million for the Seaway International Bridge between Messina, New York, and Canada. I forget if it's publicly or privately, but I've expressed my reservations about the efficacy of the state of California. I know about the rail project. It has previously been an expensive, ongoing, overextended project that, as far as I can tell, has gotten basically nowhere. It hasn't. They haven't done nearly what they would have needed to do. And this is, I guess, you can pair that with like widespread images of Silicon Valley as a place where it's like a weird place to be, but where they occasionally are able to get larger scale projects done, usually just online. But heck, Elon Musk came out of there, if you don't want to consider him as coming out of South Africa, and he's managed to get big things done. But the state, as far as I can tell, has real problems with these larger infrastructure projects, and the rail project is one example of that. And it just, I don't think that, I don't know, my personal take is that doesn't necessarily need to fit into a COVID relief bill. Let's see what the relationship there is. But other than that, Jamarl, I think we were talking about this. The news that you see coming out of Congress, please correct me if I'm wrong, is just they're scaling back this bill. That's all that we're hearing is one thing after another. They're pulling bits out of the bill.
It's horrible politics. I mean, if you think about it, the American public, I don't, it's hard to necessarily tell what's you versus outside of you. But I do think I've been right about this stuff pretty often. The American public is paying attention, and they're watching the Democratic Party continuously negotiate with themselves and scale back a bill. It's almost like there's a door here, but there's no house. It's just a door. You know what I mean? Like, you could destroy the filibuster today. You could destroy it today and pass America's agenda. You could do that. You don't have to have these negotiations with yourself. You could get Joe Manchin online. Go after Joe Manchin. You could do that. But that's somebody who really cares, who really wants to get those things accomplished. And the Democratic Party doesn't. The railway project that you're talking about, crisis is a time to try to get your agenda accomplished. It's no different with COVID. It was no different with 9/11 and Bush going into Iraq. The only difference is you have to actually believe in something and want something in order to harness whatever that tragedy is to your ends. And in this case, 500,000 people are dead. You have all of this calamity going on with people losing their jobs and everything else. I don't see anything wrong with a railway project in order to try to get jobs or people on jobs at a time where half of Californians were like eating at food banks, or people in Los Angeles eating at food banks. But yeah, it just seems like they are going down, down, down. And what they promised America seems not to be delivered, or at the very least can give America the impression that they're not delivering on things that they promise. That's not a good look.
I hear you, and agreed in its own way. Although, but we should get into future headlines. I guess just the thought that comes to me is, isn't that the nature of politics in some sense? You make larger promises, or at least you make larger commitments in advance with the size of the bills you're putting forward, and then they get whittled away by the other party. I think your point is the Democrats have a clear majority here. They can push what they want to through, and
Yes.
they should be doing so.
Yeah. And you could destroy the filibuster. It's like, dude, the filibuster wasn't used in the way it's used now. The filibuster was this kind of rare, random thing that was used, and the person would stand up there and they would speak for like 30 hours and then pass out, and then the bill would be passed. That's what it was. Now it's somebody pressing a button. They don't have to stand up. Just say, "Hey, I'm gonna object to this." That's it. And then you need 60 votes. Destroy that. Pass America's agenda. Put your judges in. And what you trust is that America will see that you were working in their interests, and they will keep you in that office. They will put you in that office that much further. I keep making the point. Democrats held the House of Representatives for nearly 50 years straight. I think they lost it maybe twice in that time period. But 50 years straight, you could do it again. And you have the opportunity to do it again with Biden coming after Trump. The question is, are they going to take it? And the answer seems like, no, they are not. They're not. It's pathetic.
You can see that happening right now. Let's get back into headlines here. The federal probe into Hunter Biden's tax affairs is moving ahead without any interference from President Biden's White House. As stated on Wednesday, Hunter Biden confirmed in December that his tax affairs stemming from his overseas business dealings were under investigation by the feds. The investigation also involves a laptop belonging to Hunter. The investigation is seeking to determine if Hunter Biden and his business associates violated tax and money laundering laws. Documents retrieved from the laptop also linked President Biden to those deals. So, of course, this would affect him, but we will see, we'll see how this investigation goes. The Manhattan townhouse where Jeffrey Epstein is said to have sexually abused underage girls is set to sell for roughly $50 million. The 28,000 square foot neoclassical townhouse at 9 East 71st Street went on the market along with Epstein's Florida mansion in July. Proceeds from the sale of the mansion are expected to go to Epstein's estate, which has created a compensation fund to settle claims from his alleged victims. It is being alleged that in her time as former President Donald Trump's Transportation Secretary, Elaine Chao, that is Mitch McConnell's wife, repeatedly used her position and agency staff to help family members that run a shipping business with ties to China. That's potentially in violation of federal ethics laws, according to an inspector general report. In international news, in Myanmar, reports from the UN say 38 protesters were killed Wednesday by security forces. The latest death toll was gleaned from various sources, with Reuters reporting 18, the Associated Press citing 33, and the Irate, it's a news website run by Myanmar exiles, saying at least 28. The UN Security Council is scheduled to meet behind closed doors on Friday to discuss this matter. We'll be airing a segment tomorrow on this topic. Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, has said she deeply regrets her government's unlawful investigation of Alex Salmond. The leader defended herself against accusations by her predecessor that she misled Parliament during her opening statement yesterday morning. The First Minister has been grilled about the 2018 meetings, where she was first made aware of allegations against her predecessor, but she subsequently had to admit to having forgotten a meeting 4 days earlier with Mr. Salmond's aide, Jeff Aberdeen, during which the investigation was discussed. She insisted she would never have wanted to get, quote unquote, Alex Salmond, and that she had no motive, intention, desire for such action against her predecessor. On Tuesday, Microsoft claimed that China-based hackers, government hackers specifically, have exploited a bug in the company's email server software to target U.S. organizations. Microsoft said that a highly skilled and sophisticated, quote unquote, state-sponsored group operating from China has been trying to steal information from a number of American targets, including universities, defense contractors, law firms, and infectious disease researchers. Microsoft said it has released security upgrades to fix the vulnerabilities to its Exchange server software. Microsoft has named hacking group Hafnium as the culprit. Stephen Adair, president of cybersecurity firm Velexity, said he's concerned the hackers will accelerate their activity in the coming days before organizations are able to install Microsoft security upgrades. South Korea's first transgender soldier, Byun Hee-soo, who was discharged from the military for undergoing gender reassignment surgery, has been found dead. The cause of death is not yet known. The 23-year-old had been receiving counseling from a mental health center. Her counselor became concerned after not hearing from her since the 28th of February and called emergency services. In December, the National Human Rights Commission of Korea said the decision not to allow her to continue to serve in the military had no legal grounds. Byun's case triggered debate about the treatment of transgender troops and soldiers from the LGBT community in the country. Pope Francis is pushing ahead with the first papal trip to Iraq scheduled for March 5th through 8th. Francis is expected to travel in an armored car with a sizable security detail. The Vatican hopes the measures will have the dual effect of protecting the Pope while discouraging contagion-inducing crowds. The trip will include a private meeting with Iraq's top Shiite cleric, Grand Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani. In Baghdad, France will meet with priests, seminarians, and nuns in the same cathedral where Islamic militants in 2010 killed 58 people. On Francis's final full day in Iraq, he will pray in a Mosul square surrounded by 4 destroyed churches and visit another church in the Christian city of Karakash that has been rebuilt in a sign of hope for Christianity's future there. In Earth and Science news, the CEO of fashion retailer Zozo, that's Yusaku Maezawa, is seeking 8 people to fly with him to the moon aboard Elon Musk's SpaceX flight in 2023. This year, Maezawa opened applications for the rare opportunity. He said in an announcement video that people from, quote, all kinds of backgrounds, end quote, are encouraged to apply. Pre-registration closes March 14th with initial screenings by March 21st. The final interview and medical checkup is expected to occur by May of this year. The rocket for the week-long mission named Starship is currently in development. Up to 12 people in total are expected to join the mission. Researchers hoping to collect mud samples deep beneath an Antarctic ice sheet were amazed to find small creatures living in the dark, freezing water. Experts from the British Antarctic Survey say the discovery of filter-feeding animals clinging to a rock was unexpected because of the lack of food and sunlight. And last but not least, in business news, sales of books written by Dr. Seuss have soared after the author's estate announced earlier this week that 6 titles would no longer be published because they contained racist and insensitive imagery. Counterintuitive, isn't it? Dr. Seuss Enterprises said on Tuesday that 6 books will no longer be published since these works contain images that, quote, portray people in ways that are hurtful and wrong, end quote. The titles prevented from sale include If I Ran the Zoo, and To Think That I Saw It on Mulberry Street, McElligot's Pool, On Beyond Zebra, Scrambled Eggs Super, and The Cat's Quizzer. None of his, top books there, but nevertheless, the company has pulled those. The announcement from Dr. Seuss's estate has been met with incorrect claims that the late author was being canceled. I don't know if those claims are incorrect. This is like Snopes fact checking something, where it's like they're false, and then you look into the substance of what they're fact checking, and it's actually kind of factual. It's just there's a degree of ambiguity that they are able to use to say, oh no, this is false, and well, no, it's just more complicated than that. On the contrary, his work has experienced renewed popularity after an attempted cancellation of, a successful cancellation of 6 of his books by the company that runs his businesses, after his decline and death. But anyway, you get what I'm saying. We need to go into a break. We will be back in a minute with Jamarl's monologue, our soapbox segment, a short conversation about that. Oh, and we'll be talking about Dr. Seuss again in a little bit over an hour. So come back for that too, our guest Carmine Sabia. But regardless, be right back on the other side of this short break.
Fault lines.
Epidemics and pandemics could kill millions of people, and they actually did. Centuries ago, deadly outbreaks called the Black Death, the plague of Justinian, and the Spanish flu ravaged countries, empires, and whole continents. Some of these diseases are still present around the globe. Others have become a thing of the past. Discover how these ancient and not so distant outbreaks from previous centuries differ from modern-day SARS, MERS, and coronavirus pandemics. Listen to our new series, Outbreak, the deadliest epidemics in human history, this week on Radio Sputnik.
Fault lines.
Welcome back to Political Misfit. Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys are in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also kicking around in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. You can also send us a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. H.R. 1 was passed last night. The Democrats in the House did what they say they were going to do on voting rights. Last night, they passed H.R. 1, the sweeping voter rights bill that ideally requires more transparency in the U.S. campaign finance system, sets stricter standards for lobbyists, and includes a slew of measures to increase access to the ballot box, including an expansion of voting registration opportunities, mail, early voting, and expanded election security measures. Now, this is from Business Insider that's given this kind of just basic assessment. Now, there are things that those positives hide. And a deeper problem, it slyly undermines and marginalizes third parties that have already been pretty marginalized in our particular political system by increasing the hurdles required for them to compete. The Green Party has been crying and screaming about this for the past few days, and we will be getting involved in looking into what their claims are. I was stepping through the bill last night trying to attach what they were saying to the elements of the bill. And some of the things that they were saying is backed up. I mean, it's in the bill. And so I don't know how many people read that 800-page bill. I would imagine not many, but those things are in there. It's almost as if they snuck it in with the other provisions, basically hiding those provisions. That said, from the perspective of the Democratic Party, this is good politics. This bill has a steeper climb in the Senate with a 60-vote threshold, but that's only if Democrats accept the premise that they need a 60-vote threshold. The filibuster is susceptible to be destroyed, and they should do just that. Keep in mind, if Democrats lose the Senate, there's no reason to believe that the next Republican president, or for that matter, Mitch McConnell, if the Democrats are standing in his way, would not blow the filibuster away himself and enact whatever that president's agenda is. It is not a safe haven, and there's no reason to believe it's such. It's no more of a safe haven than it was the bet that Republicans will put in Merrick Garland or give Merrick Garland a chance. They didn't. They could change the rules in a heartbeat. Basically, catch up, get with the game. Now, Republicans were irate about this, angry. I'm throwing fits, apoplectic. And there's a reason they're angry. Republicans diligently attacked voting rights for decades. And Democrats basically allowed them to do so without much pushback on them attacking voting rights. It is their job to represent their base. And in this case, opportunity, need, and actually good damn political sense has basically merged with Democrats on this particular bill. Attack the thing that's defending the thing that you want to attack. Basically, take out the knees. Rip off the arms. They ripped the arms off the Voting Rights Act, like Goro in Mortal Kombat. Now, this allowed a cacophony of voter ID laws in the various states. In some cases, allowing a gun license, but not allowing a student license. There were restrictions on early voting or blunt elimination from voter rolls and the purges. Look at New York in 2016. They purged, 200,000 people, and it was found to be illegal by local law and federal law. And it just so happens, coincidentally, to be in Brooklyn, Sanders' hometown. You had interstate cross-check was the latest edition of these type of tactics to basically screw around the margins with race, using race to do it. They would look at the last name of the individual, and based on the last name, they could exclude that person from the voter rolls based on some dodgy nonsense. You really only need to think about a minor number of margins. 3%. Look at the amount that it took for Trump to win Wisconsin, or for that matter, Pennsylvania. Or look at the margins that it took Joe Biden to win Georgia. I put it to you this way. In 1980, Paul Weyrich, founder of the Republican think tank, the Heritage Foundation, and ALEC, gave a fiery speech saying, quote, "I don't want everybody to vote. Our leverage in the election goes up as the voting populace goes down." Think about what he's saying. The Republican leverage in voting goes up as the voting population, meaning the number of Americans that go out to vote, goes down. That has been Republican dogma for God knows how long. And yeah, it is still the case today. This was stuff, that's the reason why Republicans hate this notion of expanding voting. It's the reason they hate it, expanding voting to mail-in voting. If you increase the number of people under their model, they lose. Because their policy are very specific, they're very limited in scope, and you need people who are in a certain degree of special interest. And if you expand the voter rolls to people who are partially interested in politics, they will probably dislike the Republicans' plan. Right here, for example, this is back in 2012. Pennsylvania new strict voter ID requirements fined 758,000 registered voters without the required ID. This includes 1/4 of Pennsylvania's super voters, people that would vote in 50 or more consecutive elections. Republican House Majority Mike Tirzai was so proud of the new constraints in listing GOP accomplishment, he boastfully stated, voter ID, which is going to allow Governor Romney to win the state of Pennsylvania, done. He understood why he was doing it. It had nothing to do with protecting the voter rolls. It had everything to do with basically winning that state. Republican Ohio must-win state. In addition to voter ID, Ohio Republicans expanded early voting in districts while rejecting it in Democratic areas. Think about that. Yeah, in Republican areas, have fun. You can have your early voting. In Democratic areas, not so much. The state had to cave in on that once people started seeing what was taking place. In Florida, voter ID, cutting early voting criminal penalties that effectively ended voting drives and throwing tens of thousands off the voter rolls. 81,000 fewer new voters are registered as compared to the same time in 2008. This is what was taking place in 2012, 2008, after the voting rights legislation basically was destroyed in court. Texas' proposed law would exclude up to 2.4 million people, Hispanics being 46.5% more likely not to have the necessary paperwork. Mississippi proposed a voter ID law requiring 25% of African Americans without the proper ID, which currently funds. Iowa secretly purged voters from its rolls, saying the new requirements needed to be in place before the 2012 election, and the, quote, usual notice and public participation would hamper the process. Wisconsin tried to save 200,000 legal voters off the rolls. 16 states had passed restrictive voter laws that may impact the 2012 election. This was Florida, Georgia, Illinois, Iowa, Kansas, Mississippi, New Hampshire, Ohio, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, South Dakota, Texas, Tennessee, Texas, Virginia, Wisconsin, and West Virginia. These states account for 79% of the electoral votes needed to win the presidency. The point I'm trying to make here is that this was an outright attack on the voting system. The Democratic Party is not wrong for pushing back. It's good politics. And for whatever you can make a point about the attacks on the Green Party or third party members and everything else, at the end of the day, this is party politics. And I don't necessarily have to like it, especially from the standpoint of me wanting a third party. But I do understand it. Right here, the Republican crusade is basically a slick lie through unwavering faces to provide political cover for legislation to suppress voter turnout in order to mitigate inconvenient demographic shifts across the United States that favor Democrats. An exhaustive study found only 10 cases of in-person voter fraud out of 600 million votes cast. Like, to put this in perspective, why wouldn't they do this? You've had an all-out assault on the items and the edifices that prop up democratic politics, whether that was unions, whether that was voter rights, whatever those cases were, meaning undermine voters of color. All of those things was done in order to get Republicans in office and to undermine the Democrats' ability to do so. Democrats took office, and what I consider to be good politics in their circle, they do something about it. Shane, what do you think? Personally, Republicans can be mad all they want. They were the ones that were attacking voting rights. And in Democrats, good politics, they're trying to defend it. I don't believe for one moment that this is for the American public. This is for themselves and for their ability to get elected. But that's their job. And they're not wrong for doing it, especially as a response to Republicans attacking for decades. What are your thoughts?
I will try to look at this a little bit objectively because, frankly, in my opinion, there are good arguments that could be made on either side, and there are bad arguments that can be made on either side, either for extending voter rights or for increasing, responsibilities on local jurisdictions to verify that voters actually can vote. So I think that, I don't want to take one side of that issue because, in an almost systemic sense, you want both. You want the people who are ostensibly voting to not be non-voters, to not be fraudulent voters, and on the other hand, you want people, as many people as you can who should be able to vote, to actually vote. And then, of course, if you ask me who should be able to vote, every citizen of the United States at the very least. But without wading into the policy back and forth, trying to look at this objectively from a higher level, it seems to me like the Democrats have a window here. Within the next couple of years, usually what happens is after the victorious first term of a new president, in those first midterms, the opposite party wins back some seats in the House and the Senate, which means if that pattern holds in 2022, the Republicans will very likely take back at least the Senate and maybe the House. And if they do so, of course, Biden will not have the majority that he currently has and that he would need to push through not just, laws like this on voter rights and, increasing voter registrations, all that stuff, but pretty much his entire agenda. So the next, and then you get a little bit of a feedback effect where in the coming presidential election and in the coming midterm too, in 2026, you could see what's going on in the next year or two coming back and perpetuating the rate at which either the Republican or the Democratic Party gains and retains hold of the two chambers of Congress and of the presidency, for that matter. So just looking at this little period of time, it definitely matters for the Democrats. Now, what are they going to do with it? I don't know. The Supreme Court, what are they going to do to push back on the consequences of H.R. 1? I don't know either. And we're talking about this at the national level, but there are also, of course, many state level considerations in different bills, and Republican states will push, by and large, for laws, voter laws that benefit their party, and of course the inverse will hold for blue states. Just trying to look at it from a high level. The key point I want to make is there is a window of time over the next year or two that's definitely going to matter for the future of these laws. Jamarl, what's your take?
I agree with you on the sense that there's a level of time that Democrats have in order to get these things accomplished. I disagree that the higher level, I don't, I don't know what that means from a higher level stuff. I know what it means from a standpoint of what is the actual fraud that these guys are talking about. And if that fraud is not there, then it's basically a cover and but a bit of a sham in order to find reasons in order to exclude people from the voter tallies. And look, Paul Weyrich, he said it himself. Heritage Fund, that's Republican dogma. That's not something I'm making up. I just gave you the quotes from the guy. And you could see it expressed in the rules and the policies that these guys put out. I mean, I wrote an article on this back in 2012. That was the thing that I was quoting on the policies and the lengths that these guys went through in order to undermine various demographics that weren't voting in their interests. And so I get this feeling like, look, the larger politics is if Republicans get back in office, they're going to destroy these laws. And they may actually make the laws on their own instead of doing this kind of knocking things around for the 2, 3, or 3%. But this kind of gets to my point of deliver for the American public, period. Like all of this gamesmanship and everything else. If you're going to open up the polling thing, fair enough, but deliver for the American public. And a lot of the stuff and a lot of the worry goes away. I'm just saying it does. And like I agree with you on the sense that there's a window. There's a window of time. I mean, if they fail, Warnock and Ossoff are some of the most vulnerable members in the Senate right now. And with Joe Biden not delivering on the 2,000 that he said he was going to do, I would say they're vulnerable. From the standpoint of the House of Representatives, there's only, a 10-vote difference between the two because they lost seats in the last election. Yeah, they're vulnerable. And so if they lose the House and the Senate, anything that Joe Biden wants to get accomplished from the standpoint of plans, off the table. And what you can get accomplished are things that the Republican Party will allow you to, which who knows what that is, especially since they want you to lose. So yeah, I agree with you on that point, Shane. They have a window of time. And if they don't take it, they will be dragged basically back into the abyss and into the swamp with the fault entirely of their own. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Yo! So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today? Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No, it's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we're in an open segment. We're swapping segments out. Usually we have an open segment at 8:45 a.m. Eastern. This time it's 7:30. At 8:45, we will instead be speaking with Miko Palet. We'll be talking to us about the upcoming Israeli elections, the ICC, the International Criminal Court, investigating human rights abuses in against Palestinians, basically. Also Netanyahu's trial. Again, that'll be at 8:45. Right now, we're talking about what we want to. And what I'm going to go to is Chris Wray's testimony the other day. Chris Wray, director of the FBI since 2017, specifically him talking about social media and how basically you need to tighten up what people are allowed to say on social media platforms because they are safe harbors for domestic extremism, safe harbors for terrorism, that sort of thing. And basically saying that the FBI is already, he said this in his testimony, that the FBI is already pressuring social media companies to do exactly that. And I want to use this to go back into one of our conversations. It's like a chicken and egg problem that we've been going back and forth on. Not quite, but kind of, having to do with who has more power in the dynamic between tech companies and DC, whether you're looking at Congress or the intelligence community or presidential fiat through executive orders, whatnot. Now, on the one hand, you could make the case that social media companies have more power because Twitter, after all, and Facebook blocked Trump. They blocked the former president of the United States. And if you were to just look at that, if you were to ignore all of the other context, you'd think, okay, they're more powerful than the president. They can block him and he can't make them keep him on. Therefore, they have the strength, etc. On the other hand, the FBI is effectively, also pressuring them. Congress, if Congress had the weight and the push, if they had the internal incentive and motivation and potency, whatever, to break these tech companies up with antitrust lawsuits, they could do so. And frankly, if tech companies hadn't been doing their bidding, I believe they would have done so in the preceding years. And certainly they'd be pushing to do so this year. If tech companies, for instance, had gone completely rogue and had let people say whatever they want to, after in 2015, 2016, the calls really started more and more earnestly for them to, tighten up the messaging on their platforms. If they hadn't done that, we undoubtedly would have faced a lot more noise against the tech companies, against Facebook and Twitter specifically. And I believe at the latest this year, we would see serious legislation just immediately breaking them up. And right now, Democrats, as far as I can tell, aren't as vocal about that. It's really the Republicans, specifically at CPAC. If you listen to Trump's speech, he was the one calling to break them up. Now, granted, they took him off, but coming back to that, why were they able to take him off? I think because people saw Trump was losing power. He had lost the election, and by most people's account, by the establishment's account for sure, not by his account. And therefore, I don't know that Trump was actually the stronger player in that party. Trump at that point no longer represented DC. And so I would still say DC has more power. Jamarl, what do you think? Does that make sense? There's maybe a less cogent argument, but a more or less cogent argument coming from me for why tech companies actually have the lower hand in this relationship. But this is something we've gone back and forth on before. What's your take?
Well, by definition, they're going to have a lower hand. At the end of the day, the government can always... look, the thing with the government needs motivation. Like a tech company is an individual, small group of people who can make these kind of agile changes and stuff like that. Government requires a certain amount of intentional will in order to do X or to do Y. And without that will, well, it flounders. And so it's like in a normal relationship, yeah, the government is going to have more power than any of the tech company. Look at what happened to Facebook. It got broken by Australia. By the same token, if you have a situation where it's an unliked political figure by the political class, then yeah, that person is susceptible. Donald Trump, whatever, he wasn't considered part of the in crowd of Republicans, despite the fact that he was doing Republican deeds and Republican wants. But from the standpoint of the McConnells of the world or the Romneys of the world, he wasn't their type of politician. He wasn't part of the Cheney crowd. You know what I mean? And because of that, he's susceptible. And I think he could potentially go to jail. I could never see Obama getting locked up for the crimes that he did in that office. You're getting all of those people killed. Same thing with George Bush. They've rehabilitated George Bush. Trump, however, who didn't do anything nearly as bad as Bush, minus the Bush stuff, but I'm just talking about the killing of 1 million people and everything else. Trump could go to jail for that, for stuff. Bush, no. So I think there's a difference in regards to class. But the question is, how long does that last? And are Republicans going to be able to maintain that level of power of the McConnell types? Or is it going to be like third-way Democrats taking over from the New Deal Democrats? And there's a very real possibility of that happening. They may lose power, in which case the Trumpians will be there. But the question becomes, who has more power? Government always has more power. Always. It just requires will and motivation. Think of trust busters. Think of Teddy Roosevelt and the railroads. Think of Teddy Roosevelt. And he brings in the railroad magnates. I can't think of the guy's name. And he basically makes the point to him that the U.S. government is in charge. You're not in charge. And basically reads him the Riot Act. I forget the guy's name. It was a big name. You would know it if I say it. But he comes in thinking he's going to run the presidency. Well, Roosevelt had a different idea in mind. But again, he had to have a different idea in mind. That's what I mean. It takes motivated thought, motivated action to go after him. If you don't have it, it's going to flounder. That's my thought.
Also, I mean, okay, you know what? I think we should cut this and go to our caller. But one brief comment here. You mentioned that Trump was of another class. I think that is absolutely true, and I really can't think of the last president who was like that. Trump has been for a long time a political figure because he's been a prominent business figure, and to some extent, people were listening to what he was saying on politics. But he was not a politician. Let's be clear. Until he became the president, he hadn't. He wasn't a mayor. He hadn't been a governor, et cetera. The last figure, it was anything close to that, but he still fits the politician category. Somebody like Ronald Reagan, who again, actor, but became governor of California. I don't, so he doesn't fit that. Who would you go back to before that? I mean, Eisenhower
Nobody
had been a general.
Nobody.
Yeah.
There's nobody I can think of. I mean, FDR was of that class. He just, they told him a traitor. I was like, you're a traitor to your class. How dare you get those poor folks stuff? But I can't think of anybody like that. I mean, because Donald Trump, he was like a blue class billionaire in the way that he engaged and the way people responded to him. But no, nobody where the Washington elite responded to as if, oh my God, the world is ending. You know what I mean? Like every immune system that's available, every white blood cell, every killer T cell just, freaked out. I can't think of anybody like that. Yeah.
No, I can't think of anybody like that either. You know what? We should go to our caller. We got Michael calling in from Sydney. Michael, thanks for the call. Almost always astute observations. What's going on?
Yeah, look, hi, Shane. I'm really glad you raised this issue. Let me first say I'm no fan of Donald Trump. I think he's a misogynist, racist, and I think he's a neo-fascist. But let me say, in qualifying that, he didn't start any wars. He withdrew troops from Syria. He withdrew troops from Iraq. And he withdrew troops from Afghanistan. The first thing Biden did reverse all those decisions and bomb Syria. So that's a qualifying statement. His foreign policy I actually like. And let me qualify it again by saying there is nothing wrong with wanting your country to be great again. Every president should want their country to be great. That's it. If they're representing their people, they're representing their country, they should want their country to be great. There is nothing wrong in that statement. But in saying that, I mean, let me qualify what's going on in America, taking them upon their own fundamental economic principles of the free market. When you've got libertarians like Ron Paul basically saying these companies have too much power. Now, let me qualify. You have three assumptions that underpin neoclassical economics as defined by Milton Friedman. That is free markets, perfectly free markets, non-governmental interference, okay, and perfect competition and perfect information. So free markets and non-governmental influence go together. So that's one assumption. The government's interfering in the market by telling the markets to ban this guy. Second, right, perfect information. Why are they advertising to me? Why can't I get the information I want? Why can't I get RT in my Facebook feed? Why can't I get RT or Sputnik or CGTN in my in any other feed I get on Twitter or anything else like that? And the third thing is perfect competition, no barriers to entry. Well, then why, when Parler tried to set up their own app, right, where they wanted to run their own program, companies like Amazon, Google, combined together to get rid
and
of
Apple. And Apple, yeah, they combine together to get rid of them.
well. Yes, and Apple as well. So, but you can rip them apart upon their own tenets of their own economic theory alone. And when you got people like Ron Paul, the libertarians, and I agree with
yes.
speech. I don't care how horrible your speech is, you have the right to have it. And like Noam Chomsky on the left, and I don't think he's a true leftist because he actually supported the war in Syria, right? I think he's actually an imperial leftist, and he thinks he's going to push Joe Biden to the left. Well, how's that going, Noam? Right? When he actually come out and he said, free speech is there to protect precisely the speech that is not popular. So
it's true. He was, yes. Yeah, Michael, we've got to close it here. We've got to close it here. Thank you for the call. We're running up against our break, and we got to go to our next guest. I agree with you completely on this one. Even if you look at it from the sort of most capitalist-friendly angle, from the through the libertarian lens, you're talking, the Friedman perspective there. They like you're saying, they are not engaging in the principles that the most adamant adherents of a free market, more capitalistic economy would adhere to. And so, like you say, when Ron Paul himself is coming out and calling for trust busting on these orgs, not something you'd expect a libertarian to do under usual circumstances. That should be a canary in a coal mine. That on the principles on which most companies evade the harshest repercussions of something like a trust busting operation going on, these companies shouldn't be held to that same standard. And I want to come back to the freedom of information thing briefly before we close. They are purposefully, the whole point here is purposefully to restrict what people are allowed to say on these platforms, which it's, the immediate downstream effect of cutting off speech is you cut off people's access to information. So there's a sort of self-perpetuating decline of our ability to trust these institutions and of our ability to access information through them. And frankly, I don't doubt that part of the information, and we've seen this, part of the information that they're blocking is information that's critical of the platforms themselves. When Ron Paul, for instance, wrote his article critical of Facebook, and then his personal page was immediately blocked, that itself, I mean, speaking of the man himself, that itself should be a warning sign. But we need to go into our break. Michael, thank you for the call. We will be back in a minute with our next new guest, Andreas Peter, talking about the political party AfD, Alternative for Deutschland, being designated a suspected political extremist group in Germany, the state surveying that group, if it's justified, what it means for German politics. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be right back on the other side of this short break.
Fault Lines.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines, we divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today, get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and dig straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. And as Shane mentioned, we were going to hop across the pond and take a few steps into Germany. Germany Intelligence Services has designated the AfD a suspected, and AfD stands for Alternative for Germany, as suspected extremist groups. Now that means that the National Party, which is already under surveillance in a number of German states, can have this activity surveilled nationwide. Now, it's not for nothing, meaning the party has clear extremist tendencies. The party leader in the eastern state of Thuringia, a gentleman named Bjorn Hack, once described Berlin Holocaust Memorial as, quote, a monument of shame, unquote, and called for a 180-degree turnaround in Germany's handling of the Nazi past. Picking up the same theme, Alexander Golland trivialized the Nazi era as, quote, just a speck of a bird muck in more than 1,000 years of successful German history. In the words of Matthias Quint, a German expert on far-right-based Thuringia, not everyone in AfD is ideologically far-right, but everyone in the party or voting for the party is supporting a party that has far-right tendencies. I mean, this gets worse. The AfD adopted Pedalgia's anti-establishment rhetoric, such as slogan, lying press, which was used by the Nazis. Germany must reintroduce permanent border controls and the EU external borders must be completely shut. The AfD says that position contradicts, well, of course, the freedom of movement And you also have one of the leaders, Frank Petrie, once said that the German police should, quote, if necessary, shoot at migrants seeking to enter the country illegally. And she was seen apparently as a moderate. I mean, there's more to this. They want to ban mosque, or they want to ban funding for mosque in Germany, ban the burqa and the Muslim call to prayer, put all imams through a state vetting process. Yeah, this gets pretty bad, but the question becomes whether or not it is valid to basically oversee the entire party this way and consider the entirety of the party as an extremist for what may be some of the members. To have this conversation, we're joined by Adrius Peters. He's a correspondent, editor, press officer, and deputy editor-in-chief with a focus on economics, finance, and the history of the Cold War in German Democratic Republic. Andreas, welcome to the show, man. Thank you for joining us.
Hi there.
So, is it as bad as it sounds? Meaning, is there a reason? Is there a good reason for the German state? I mean, because Germany has laws against indecency and against, let's say, being racist and whatnot. And so they basically have to use dog whistles. I mean, they can't necessarily come out and be brutal. Do they have a good reason? Does the German state have a good reason to put this group, the AfD, on this kind of extremist list? Or is the German state being overly cautious? Let's say it that way.
I'm afraid that's not so simple as it seems, as always. The AfD is a special case because the AfD was founded as a protest party against the Euro and the European Union as a project of professors. And they were actually that, but the blood, the rebirth and the blood transfusion for the party was the refugee crisis in 2015. And on that phase, in that era, a lot of guys came into the party. You can say they are really right-wing, right nationalist, right extreme, obscure guys from hooligans, skinheads, and so on. And it's true that in that party is a significant part of that party is right-wing, openly and with no doubts.
And Andreas, just to make the point that you made, and I want you to go forward afterwards, the Syrian war, when we invaded Syria, or at the very least when Obama was trying to overthrow that country, you had, 500,000 people to die. You had refugees that basically flooded into the various countries. Even the wars from the standpoint of Iraq, you had ISIS, you had all of these things that was pushed by our intrusion into the Middle East. And they ended up going to Europe and destabilizing the politics of the various countries in Europe, including Germany. I remember a young woman begging Angela Merkel to let people in, and Angela Merkel was like, I just can't, we don't have enough room. Angela Merkel ends up letting in, 1 million, I think it was more than 1 million Muslims, and that created a very strong reaction in Germany, sending people to this specific party. Did I explain that correctly?
Yeah, but it's not just the true core of the party, because you have to know we have this so-called Superwahljahr in 2021 in Germany. The election of the national parliament, the parliaments of some federal states, and it is obvious in the observation of a lot of guys in the media that it is suspicious that exactly in that year, a half year before that the election, the security service, the Verfassungsschutz, held up this shield that they want to observe the AfD. Again, yes, there are a lot of right-wing guys, a lot of openly racist and xenophobic and so on. But to say that the whole party is that is not true. It's not fair. So, of course, I said it. That transfusion, the rebirth of the AfD was the refugee crisis, and the official policy of actually all parties besides the AfD. And in the meaning and in the viewing of the voters of the AfD, of the majority of the voters, the AfD was the only party in Germany who said, no, we don't want that. And you can say, of course, that's right or wrong or something, but I think that is one of the solution of the miracle of the power of the AfD. And we have another part of the miracle of the AfD in the East German countries. A lot of voters there have the feeling that they were treated very unfairly in the unification process, and they want revenge for that. And the AfD is, for them, in their opinion, kind of what you mean of that revenge to show their protest against the establishment. I think it's not so easy as it seems in the first view.
So there is to try to sum it up very briefly, there is suspected extremism. There is what is being alleged here, but that is one cohort that came in and sort of took over and dominated the party since 2015, since the start of the refugee crisis. And this is also inevitably going to be seen and is in fact a response to the fact that AfD is a Eurosceptical party, that they're sort of cutting against the grain of the most prominent political parties in Germany. I mean, AfD, as far as I can tell by my sort of simple outsider reading, is now the third most popular party, is the third most powerful party in the German parliament, 12.6% of the Bundestag and the seats in the Bundestag, 94 seats. How do you see the AfD responding to this? I mean, I'm sure they have been talking about this for quite a while. I'm sure they're going to be vocal in their response to this new statement. Andreas.
You mean responding against this new move of the security service?
Exactly, this new designation.
Yeah. It's, of course, the party is totally upset about it, and they say that the establishment want to diminish the chances for the party in the next election. But they cannot deny that they have that they have a right extremist problem in the party. It's existing. And you can say it with names. You've said it in your little introduction. The name Björn Höcke or Andreas Kalbitz. They are the prominent members of the so-called Flügel, the wing. And though the wing has dissolved themselves in the last year because the Verfassungsschutz wanted to observe the party actually already in the last year, but you have a lot of guys in the party. They are openly racist, openly neo-fascist, openly whatever. But you have also a lot of guys from the foundation period of the party. They are just in quotes, just skeptical against the European Union, skeptical against the euro, skeptical even against migration, but they are not racist or fascist or something. And that is
so on that point, we've only got a minute left, Andreas. I want to be clear here. Do you see the AfD going through a dramatic sort of cleaning house period, a reformation period in the coming months, where they try to shape up their ranks? If so, how do you see that going?
They started it already because they sent some letters or some information into the bases that they have to be carefully choose the words, that they don't choose some words of some very special words they very popular in the right.
But Andreas, that's not cleaning up. That's not cleaning up. That's just polishing the words.
Yeah, but cleaning up in the opinion of the is to make some makeup, not to clean the party.
Okay. Okay, yeah, I wanted to clarify that. That's important. Like, I don't want to be theatrics. I think Shane was getting at, are they going to clean up the party? And the answer is no. Andreas Peter is a correspondent, editor, press officer, and deputy editor-in-chief with a focus on economics, finance, and the history of the Cold War and the German Democratic Republic. Andreas, thank you. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment with the 8 o'clock headlines.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, we're precipitously perched at the edge of this resilient and exploited globe. Welcome to your context lens for the American perspective. Here in the left corner, I am the vigilant, indefatigable political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the independent corner, reading the tea leaves and drinking too much coffee, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
That means you are listening, more likely than not, to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Again, guys, I apologize. I am very hoarse this morning, but I'm going to do the news nonetheless. Let's get into the headlines. Let's get into the news. At least 2,369 new coronavirus deaths and 66,714 new cases were reported yesterday in the United States. Over the past week, there's been an average of 64,409 cases per day. That's a decrease of 17% from the average 2 weeks earlier. As of this morning, more than 28,804,000 people in the United States have been infected with the coronavirus, and 518,000 have died from it. Died from it or killed by the government that didn't do due diligence. Take your choice of description. On Thursday, the World Health Organization said the number of cases in Europe is now rising after 6 weeks of decline. Last week, the number of cases rose 9% to just over 1 million. Authorities said they were seeing a resurgence in Central and Eastern Europe, with new cases also on the rise in Western Europe, where cases were already high. That's strange. The House of Representatives canceled a session for Thursday following law enforcement's warning of a possible plot by a militia group to breach the U.S. Capitol. The Capitol complex is ringed with non-scalable barbed wire, topped 8-foot fences, and is still guarded by hundreds of National Guard members. As a result, the House moved the intended session to Wednesday night, in which they successfully passed H.R. 1, a sweeping government and election reform bill. H.R. 1, known as For the People's Act, would overhaul the election or the government ethics and campaign finance laws, seek to strengthen voting rights by creating automatic voter registration and expanding access to early and absentee voting. The House also passed the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. The legislation will ban chokeholds and overhaul qualified immunity protections for law enforcement. Before passing this part bothers me greatly. The U.S. House of Representatives canceled a session scheduled for Thursday following a law enforcement warning of a possible plot by a militia group to breach the Capitol. There's something odd about that and something worrying about that. You have all the power in the world. You are a sovereign power at this point, meaning you're the sole dispensation or dispenser of force. The idea that you will hide and cover and choose not to do the functions of the U.S. government because you're terrified of some kind of militia group is somewhat disturbing to me. I don't care if you had to ring 1 million cops all throughout Washington, D.C. in order to keep yourselves intact to do your job. You do your job, and you don't necessarily let a militia group scare you away from doing your job. It just sets a bad precedent, and it looks horrible. When the Capitol riot took place, my first impression was that's a win. They were able to breach the Capitol. They were able to humanize a building that seemed to be on a cloud somewhere, and then people realized, oh, wait, that's not floating on a cloud in some nether region. That's actually on a ground in a tangible location that we can get to, and with enough numbers, breach the gates. That's what they learned. Yes, you can put various people in jail and everything else, but at the end of the day, the impression of the various militia groups of the right-wing nationalists, what they saw was, with enough numbers, you can knock them or you can hit them and you can get through. And so now you have these threats, and you have a Capitol full of congressmen who are freaked out because they realize they could be touched. To stop a session gives this impression of fear and cowardice. And I got to be honest, it is not something that looks good on a government with $1 trillion military budget. Just saying. President Biden has agreed to lower the income cap for stimulus checks. Adults who earn less than $75,000 per year will get the full $1,400. People who earn more than $80,000 will get nothing. The House passed the bill last night and will have to ratify the changes. Other changes include scrapping the $15 an hour minimum wage, $140 million for California Rail, and $1.5 million for the Seaway International Bridge between Manassas, New York, and Canada. This is pathetic. Joe Biden is basically being led around by Joe Manchin. Joe Manchin, God King at this point, Joe Manchin, because for whatever reason, everything is going through him. And Joe Biden is not willing to use, spin, exert, not even a nanospeck of political capital and to get any of these things accomplished, which to me get across, he doesn't really care about these things. When you care about something, you go to the mat for it. For example, Obama caring about the Trans-Pacific Partnership. He cared about it. He was able to go to the mat for it. He was even saying, while Hillary Clinton was running, trying to escape the smudge, the stench of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, he was still out there saying, yes, I'm going to pass it. I don't care what the American public wants. I'm going to get this done. He didn't get it done, but that's not the point. He was willing to fight for it and use political capital for it. Same thing, you can make an argument of protecting Wall Street. He was able to throw his body in front of the pitchfork. Stop! I am the black president that you elected. And I am standing here protecting Wall Street against the pitchforks. Homeowners, yes, you can go bust. But Wall Street, I'm going to protect. Do you know how much money they put into my pocket? So there's that. My issue with this is that you basically told the American public you were going to give them $2,000. Then you turned around and said, oh, actually what we meant was math. You had to do the $1,400 that we're going to give you plus the $600 that Donald Trump gave you. And we know Donald Trump gave it because Donald Trump wrote his name on the checks. I got one of those checks with Donald Trump's name on it, which is why I know it was explicitly from Donald Trump. You sold the public a bill of goods. That's what it boils down to. And to make it even worse, it's not even 2,000. You start lowering the cap of number of people that would get it. I think it's more than 10 million additional people won't get it as a result of the changes that you're making. The American public watches, and what they see is a president that said you're going to get 2,000, changed it to 14,000, 1.4 thousand, and then changed it even to that in order to create a gradient by which some people don't get it. So the guy that's making 70,000, let's say the guy making 79,000 gets something. The guy who's making $2,000 more doesn't. Is $2,000 more that much of a difference in order to eliminate that individual from getting something? And should that person now be for this if you're going to cut off the number of people who are going to get it? Meaning, if I'm not going to get it, why should I care about the other people getting it? It's a shared interest thing, which is the reason why you give it to everybody. You don't want to create these particular divisions in the way that people see this stuff. You want it to be a shared interest. And that is the thing that you just destroyed. Not to mention the $15 an hour minimum wage, which would have been one of the defining attributes of your presidency. If you got nothing else accomplished, you would have got that accomplished. You would have been able to give all of these people, 42% of the public making, $18,000 a year. What would $15 an hour have done for their lives? Transformative. But you didn't do that. You didn't change their lives. You didn't do what you said you were going to do. Shane, what do you think about this? I think there are going to be great consequences for this.
They don't have the votes for it. You already brought up Manchin
yourself,
they do have
the votes.
King, who admittedly, to your chagrin, he also, I don't know if it's to your chagrin, it's to your deep satisfaction, he was one of the more prominent voices opposing Irate. So, count that as a point in his favor.
Well, the only reason he opposed Irate because Irate went after his daughter.
Yes. Well, but still, it counts. He opposes increasing the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour. He opposes abolishing the filibuster. As far as I can tell, the Democrats don't have the votes for either of those.
Well, Biden doesn't want to expend political capital. That's what it boils down to. Meaning, Biden wasn't pushing for Irate. Biden wasn't pushing for the $15 an hour. He didn't do any of that stuff. Meaning, he didn't push Manchin. He didn't talk to Manchin. Do you know what I mean? Like, he didn't push the people that would have been necessary to push to try to get it across. He didn't do any of that stuff. He didn't care.
Okay. All right. I'm not against blaming Joe Biden, but as far as I can tell factually, Joe Manchin has stated his opposition to both of those key things that you keep bringing up.
No,
and
Shane,
so if it's a 51 to
I get that Joe Manchin is stating his opposition. Don't misunderstand me. I get that. But it's politics. And the president of the United States has leeway in regards to trying to get people to change their mind on a particular subject. However, they need to get them to change their mind. Joe Biden has not exerted any of that political capital, which is the point that I'm making. I'm not saying that Manchin is not against it. I'm saying that the Democratic Party has the votes necessary to do it. I'm saying that Biden is not willing to expend the political capital to try to get Manchin on board to do it. That's the point I'm making.
Well, like I said a long time ago, he's inert. He was an inert candidate. Now he's an inert president. He still hasn't come out and done a single press conference. So he's a weak dude. And what is he doing right now? He's probably asleep. Hopefully the guy's getting some sleep, whatever, because his brain needs it, frankly. But again, I'm not hesitant to criticize Joe Biden, and we have consistently. But this is all predictable. This is all stuff that we saw coming.
Yeah.
The idea that people would be overly satisfied with getting him in office, and then that he would be slow to act, and he wouldn't get done what they wanted him to get done, and it would demotivate progressives and just people on the left in general. All of that is coming to pass, as far as I can tell.
It was infinitely predictable, which is why I didn't vote for him. Because I expected this. Yeah, we're going to do this. We're going to do hope and change. We're going to do this. And then you get it off and it's not that. And the reason why I know that is because you can look at Obama's presidency, what he promised, and what he ended up delivering. I mean, there's a great clip where Obama is debating Hillary Clinton. I never forget this, because this is one of the first few things in my political memory where, I can call back to, because it was during the Obama era, and I was, aware in that period. But Obama is debating Hillary Clinton. Obama tells Hillary Clinton that your individual mandate would be something that the insurance companies would probably like, because you're going to chain people into those insurance companies. I, Obama, will not have the individual mandate. And Hillary Clinton and Obama fought on that. And Obama was like, yeah, I'm not going to do it. And the insurance company is going to love it. Obama gets in office, and what's the first thing he does? The individual mandate. He mentions the public option. What's the first thing to die? The public option. I'm making the point that just because they promise it doesn't mean they're going to deliver it. And what you would typically see is they making promises in the primaries. Those promises pretty much get marginalized or go away. And by the time you get to mano a mano in the election, the people don't even care, don't even matter anymore. You're in a different world. And so after seeing that with Obama, there was no reason to believe that wasn't going to happen with Joe Biden. And here we are. Promises that Joe Biden made, he's walking back. And if he's not willing to fight to get the $15 an hour minimum wage done now, I don't believe for a moment he's going to try to invest the political capital to get it done when he needs 60 votes to do it. So this is where this dies. And this is where people need to realize you've been had. You've been had. The federal probe into Hunter Biden's tax affairs is moving ahead without any interference from President Biden's White House, as stated on Wednesday. Hunter Biden confirmed in December that his tax affairs, stemming from his overseas business dealings, were under investigation by the feds. The investigation also involves a laptop belonging to Hunter. The investigation is seeking to determine if Hunter Biden and his business associates violated tax and money laundering laws. Documents retrieved from the laptop also links President Biden to those deals. The Manhattan townhouse where Jeffrey Epstein is said to have sexually abused underage girls is set to sell for roughly $50 million. The 28,000 square foot neoclassical townhouse at 9 East 71st Street went on the market along with Epstein's Florida mansion in July. Proceeds from the sale of the mansion are expected to go to Epstein's estate, which has created a compensation fund to settle claims for his alleged victims. Oh, wow. Does that house lose value because Epstein was in it? What do you think, Shane? Is it less valuable? I know that sounds strange.
Earlier. No, I hear you. I was wondering earlier, what ghosts are haunting that house? Because, God, stay away from there. And I'm kind of kidding. But no, it's going to be forever tainted by that association.
Exactly.
So yeah, it probably went on a discount. I'm sure that didn't come with a boost to the value that Epstein used to own it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And just when you think about it, it's like, ugh, that's sketchy. In a former time, and I like the term ghost for that, because in a way it is like the feeling, like your awareness of what took place in the house basically haunts that house. Yeah, I love that. In her time as former President Donald Trump's transportation secretary, Elaine Chao repeatedly used her position and agency staff to help family members that run a shipping business with ties to China in potential violation of federal ethics laws, according to an Inspector General report. The internal watchdog cited Chao for 4 kinds of ethics violations, including requiring Department of Transportation staff to help with her personal errands and with marketing her father's biography. In defense of her actions, Chao office sent a memo dated September 24, 2020, citing, quote, anyone familiar with Asian culture knows it is a core value in the Asian community to express honor and filial respect towards one's parents, and this ingrained value of love, respect, and filial piety always takes precedence over self-promotion and self-aggrandizement. Chao announced her resignation January 7th, saying she was deeply troubled by the previous day's mob that attacked the Capitol. Those are your headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Back in a moment.
Fault lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing
No Carmine just yet?
in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Fault lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live from my station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can send us a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. I've been pretty straightforward in my assessment of what took place on January 6th and Donald Trump's responsibility for what took place on January 6th. Of course, I'm talking about the raid on the Capitol. They've been having congressional hearings on basically how was the Capitol breached? What happened on January 6th? Why did it happen? Who's responsible? And there's been a lot of very weird things that took place on January 6th, including the people who were in positions who needed the authority to be able to act, not been given that authority. Or for that matter, taking a huge amount of time before help came. This gets weirder when you find out that Charles Flynn was involved, apparently, in the response, despite the fact that the military said he wasn't. And you even have this situation where his brother, Michael Flynn, was calling for martial law, while his brother was supposedly making bad choices and defending an insurrection. Take a listen to this video for the moment. The person who you're listening to is D.C. National Guard Commander William J. Walker. Now, this was the gentleman that was giving testimony yesterday. Let's listen to what he said yesterday, because he had a few things that were mind-blowing. Let's play this clip.
The Secretary of the Army's January 5th letter to me withheld that authority for me to employ a quick reaction force. Additionally, the Secretary of the Army's memorandum to me required that a concept of operation be submitted to him before the employment of a quick reaction force. I found that requirement to be unusual, as was the requirement to seek approval to move guardsmen supporting the Metropolitan Police Department to move from one traffic control point to another. At 1:30 p.m. on January 6th, we watched as the Metropolitan Police Department began to employ officers to support the Capitol Police. In doing so, the officers began to withdraw from the traffic control points that were jointly manned with District of Columbia Guardsmen. At 1:49 p.m., I received a frantic call from then Chief of United States Capitol Police Stephen Sun, where he informed me that the security perimeter of the United States Capitol had been breached by hostile rioters. Chief Sun, his voice cracking with emotion, indicated that there was a dire emergency at the Capitol, and he requested the immediate assistance of as many available National Guardsmen that I could muster. Immediately after that 149 call, I alerted the U.S. Army senior leadership of the request. The approval for Chief Sun's request would eventually come from the acting Secretary of Defense and be relayed to me by Army senior leaders at 5:08 p.m., about 3 hours and 19 minutes later.
3 hours and 19 minutes to respond. Not just 3 hours and 19 minutes to respond. He also makes the point that his hands were basically tied, and that in a situation where they were basically dealing with the civil rights protests when George Floyd died, he had no such restrictions in regards to the ability for cops to use force. It was very strange, very weird. And Shane and I were talking about this yesterday. We were trying to get Garland. We're going to get Garland on to discuss. But right here, General Walker just testified that General Charles Flynn and General Pyatt were the ones that were worried about optics. He goes further and makes the argument that basically says that they were worried about optics, which is the reason why it wasn't defended and the area wasn't under control. To speak about this and have a conversation about this, we're joined with Carmine Sabia, is writer and editor at large at thesabiareport.com. Carmine, what's going on?
How you doing today, guys?
We're doing all right. So, Carmine, did you get an opportunity to hear the hearings yesterday?
You know what? I in and out. I didn't watch them all.
Okay.
Kind of cool.
Well, okay. What did you think about the ones that you did watch? Let's say it that way.
I mean, nothing unexpected, man. You know, we kind of knew all this stuff already, honestly.
Well, we didn't know that it was taking 3 hours to respond, and we didn't know that their hands were tied in regards to, meaning he had to get explicit permission before the guards can even arm themselves, which kind of explains why the cops were out there fighting or fist fighting. I don't know. Some of this stuff was weird. I mean, you didn't think that some of the testimony was strange. The 3 hour response time seems to be absurd. I mean, it's like the Capitol is under siege. Go for it.
3 hour response time was shocking. That was shocking. I'm not gonna lie.
We already kind of knew that. Carmine, go ahead. But yeah, we saw that. You were watching the day of. It took a long time for
that's what I was saying.
for them to
saw
start to push back.
They weren't there.
Yeah.
You saw in real time they weren't there. So, but it is shocking that it did take that kind of time, and that's, I don't know. It's frightening because it makes you wonder why. I mean, honestly, even as a Republican, I'm looking at that going, that doesn't make sense. You know, and because at a certain point, you know, you're an American before you're a Republican or a Democrat.
Right. And you don't want to see the Capitol taken down like that. I don't want to see Mike Pence dragged out and hung.
Exactly.
Yeah, I don't want to see that. And so it's like, because my question would have been, did you guys have a healthy understanding that the Capitol was under siege? Did you not care that the Capitol was under siege? Was the Capitol not a priority in regards to it being under siege? Like, at which point in this process did they look at this and think this was normal? You know what I mean? Like, it seems like the response would have been far more significant and far faster. And that's the part that didn't entirely make sense. And that's where I think the hearings honestly need to go. What took so long? I mean, that is very bizarre. I mean, like you say, you have to admit that yourself. What do you think these hearings are going to accomplish? Anything?
No, of course not. Never does. All it's really doing is providing a lot of cover right now for Biden and the monstrosity of the HR 1 bill that just passed the House, and, you know, cutting how many people are going to get the stimulus check, and the fact that Biden can't answer a question because he's senile. It's covered for all that, but the fact of the matter is, does anything ever happen from any hearing ever in Washington, D.C.? Can you think of a real hearing where you're like, wow, real change came from that hearing.
Real change. Maybe the church commission. And it wasn't real. I mean, it depends on what you mean by real change. I mean, real is too strong. Right. Yeah. Real is too strong even in that case.
I was thinking of that as exactly that for some reason also came to my mind immediately, but I was like, no, that's a terrible example because what actually happened as a result of that?
Nothing.
Exactly nothing. And I don't mean to be too critical, Jamarl. It was mostly funny to me that also came to my mind. I agree. What this does create is an ongoing press narrative that the establishment media can continue to draw from in their attacks on the Republican Party and Trump, who, as far as we can tell, we can go to CPAC for a moment too, actually, Carmine.
And if you support Trump or the Republican Party, you're a white supremacist Nazi. That's all this is doing.
That's what this is doing for sure. And Trump is now effectively the head of the Republican Party. He made that clear at CPAC. I don't see any I don't see that going away anytime soon. You know, even the ongoing lawsuits against him on his business, on his taxes, and of course relating to January 6th. I don't see those seriously denting his leadership either. Those are going to be their own narrative, but his supporters are going to dismiss them as potentially they should. You know, if it's the selective application of justice, then is that really justice after all? In my opinion, the jury's still out on that one because, frankly, I'm not unhappy seeing more corrupt politicians getting charged for their corruption. But again, I'm sure there's more than Trump out there. What did you think of his speech at CPAC? How effective do you think that was, or ineffective do you think that was at consolidating his leadership? And what did you take from that, Carmine?
I think it was very effective. I think that it's exactly what people were looking for. People wanted to hear him be him. They didn't want some laid back presidential. No. They didn't want that. They wanted the Trump that they know, and they got him. And I think that's who he has to be. That's who he has to be. He's the leader of the party because of, not in spite of, the way he talks and the things he says. So I think that's kind of a sticking point with the mainstream media and with the Democrats that they don't understand. Is that he didn't win in spite of that stuff. He won because of that stuff.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it was because of that stuff too.
Want to hear.
Yeah, I do agree that that's why he won. I do agree also that the reason that those hearings are important was because of what took place on January 6th. I mean, like you said yourself, sitting here today, you said, I didn't like seeing that. I don't want to see people getting dragged out, which means on some level, you didn't necessarily like the fact that the Capitol got raided. By the same token, there should be honest inquiry into why, who was involved. For all we know, some of the Republicans might have been involved in the putsch attempt. For all we know, somebody working with the cops could have fell down on the job. Maybe somebody went to sleep. I think it is important to know. I mean, whether or not something has changed as a result, it's less important than knowing the details of what happened. That 3-hour detail is a big deal. That's a major deal.
I agree, but shouldn't those hearings also be taken in places like, I don't know, Seattle and Portland? And how are people taking over whole swaths of your city and nothing's being done about it? Why are those cities not important? Because senators and representatives don't live there? Much worse has happened in those cities than happened in Washington, D.C. that day, and nobody's investigated a damn thing. And the media doesn't care. So explain to me the double standard, because that's what it seems to the rest of us. Like there's this huge double standard about what we care about.
But it's not a double standard.
I think the double standard comes because these are the halls of Congress. But I think Carmine, frankly, has a point. What happened on January 6th was it was a different kind of political shock. So it might have been greater in intensity, but shorter in time, and in its own way shorter in immediate severity or whatever. But it was more intense for people because it's the Capitol building, it's the Capitol area. People were breaking into the halls of Congress, et cetera. And they interrupted an ongoing session, voting to confirm the Electoral College ballot. So it had an immediate political impact. On the other hand, the Seattle area, I'm forgetting the name of it right now for some reason, but the Capitol Hill occupied zone, autonomous zone, Chaz, exactly. That was ongoing for months. So that might have been a less intense political shock in the moment, but it was like a chronic, persistent thing that was happening. I hear his point, Jamarl. We got to go to a break, but what do you think?
I think they're different. And the reason I think they're different is I get how the protests took place, especially the aspect like the 2 or 3% or whatever that percentage was that was violent and that hit businesses and everything else. But the inspiration for these were dramatically different. In one case, a man was killed by the cops. 1,000 of those killings take place every year. 1% of the cops get charged. There is no accountability in that process. That's a breakdown of the social safety net, and the public responded to it. They were right to respond to it. From the standpoint of the Capitol, you had the president who didn't want to accept the fact that he lost the race and tried to throw over the table, screamed at the height of his lungs that he was cheated, had a bunch of people raid the Capitol screaming his name. I think those are dramatically different cases. And I get the conflation, or the want to conflate the two. And, whatever you want to think about what took place for the Chaz was a deviation from the protests on some level, even though they might have used the protests as this kind of sticking point. But no, I see these things as different. But let's talk about it after the break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. The guest that we have with us is Carmine Sabia, writer and editor at large at thesabiareport.com. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Shooting from the lip.
We're taking no prisoners here. Real opinions for real people. Where we bring you people with controversial views, and instead of trying to catch them out, we actually let them expand on their views. What's going on in British politics, European politics, and indeed in world politics as well. And wherever you are, whether you're a UKIP supporter, a Tory or Labour, everything is in turmoil.
John Gaunt.
Shooting from the lip.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we continue to be joined by our guest, Carmine Sabia. He is the writer and editor at large at SabiaReport.com. We're going to move into Dr. Seuss and talk about the canceling, the deplatforming of the late Dr. Seuss, with 6 of his books being pulled. But I want to give Carmine a chance to finish up and sort of cap off, respond to what Jamarl was saying on that last topic. Carmine, before we move on to Dr. Seuss, you were making the point that Capitol Hill, the breach of Capitol Hill, and what happened last summer with the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, different Capitol Hill over in Seattle, that why aren't we having hearings on what happened then, when that was a sustained months-long occupation of a sector of a city? What did you think of what Jamarl had to say?
I understand what he's saying, but let me ask you a question. If you live in Seattle or Portland, which one was scarier to you?
Well, I mean, that's just kind of in the moment or in the space. I mean, I don't know if that means anything. I mean, anybody that's anywhere is just kind of a quirk of fate of something. And so, yeah, if I'm directly in danger, I'm going to be greatly bothered as opposed to not being directly in danger. So, yeah, if I was at the Capitol, I would have been terrified. If I was at Seattle, I would have been terrified if somebody was trying to take my head off, yeah.
But isn't this, Carmine, I think Carmine is making this point. I don't want to cut you off, Carmine, but it seems to me like he was making the point, as he did very clearly as he was making his case last segment, that, well, the politicians weren't there. Politicians are on Capitol Hill. So, Jamarl, well, we may be, we're going to have different perspectives depending on where we are. Isn't this a weird case of political elitism, where the leaders are responding to not a threat to the American body politic or a threat to the lives of their constituents over in these other cities, but they're responding, immediately, harshly to a threat to their own lives, which again, I don't like
why
that.
Wouldn't
Nobody
they do
on this
that?
channel likes that.
Yeah, why wouldn't they do that?
Well, because they're statesmen, because they're leaders of our country.
Their lives, so they're statesmen, so they should risk their lives? Is that what you're saying?
Well, no, they should make sure that nobody's lives are risked unnecessarily. They should be protecting their constituents as they would their own flesh and blood. Because they are, after all, our representatives.
Well, we're having a conversation. You made the point that these guys seem to be protecting their own lives instead of their constituents. I'm making the point that there is a difference between what took place in regards to the Capitol. That, by the way, a point that neither of you touched. that what took place at the Capitol and the reason it took place was dramatically different than what took place in regards to the protests. And yeah, all things being equal, you would never hear me say that, yeah, it's great for businesses to be torched and destroyed. You'd never hear me make that argument. You would hear me make the argument, though, that it is right for the public to respond in a situation where people are being killed. I mean, for God's sake, isn't there some kind of ruling or isn't there some kind of moral thing where the public should be protected? I mean, 1,000 killings a year with 1% prosecuted? Why is that okay? And why should the public accept that as being, okay, the public should accept being killed in this particular capacity, but they shouldn't, but they should protect the others? No, they should be protected in all capacities. I'm making the point that there is something different and fundamentally different about Donald Trump screaming that he won an election by a landslide, that he lost, and having those people raid the Capitol, as opposed to somebody responding to the fact that they were being killed or maligned and there were no consequences over and over and over again, 999 times for the killings. I think those are different. I think those are completely different. So, we could go, we can keep repeating this, or we can go to Dr. Seuss, but you're not going to, because you're not going to get me to agree that 1,000 killings by cops and the public responds is the same thing as a president lying about winning a race and having the public basically ransack the Capitol because of it.
I didn't say that, but I'm not in the camp that the cause of a situation justifies all possible responses to it. I'm like, in some sense, I'm a consequentialist, not completely, but I don't think the consequences of either what happened last summer or what happened this winter on January 6th, I don't think the consequences of either of those incidents are good. And whatever caused them, you can have that conversation. But I think it would make sense to move to Dr. Seuss, which is not normally a sentence you would hear us say on this radio show. But Dr. Seuss, the late Theodore Geisel, children's book author, 6 of his books have been canceled. The company that is managing his affairs after his departure has decided to pull those after the authors of a study came out with this study saying that many of his works included racist material, stereotyped caricatures of people of color. And now, as far as I can tell, his business, the late Dr. Seuss's business, basically immediately folded and decided to pull 6 of his more marginal and lesser known works. Although I believe his first book was one of those that was canceled here. What I saw in not McGilligan's Pool, I'm getting a little bit confused here. What I saw on Mulberry Street, I believe it was, and to think that I saw it on Mulberry Street, I believe that was Dr. Seuss's first work. Anyway, that's the most prominent of the ones that got pulled here. And since then, sales of his books have risen meteorically. Carmine, just in a broad sense, what's your take on this?
Stupid. How's that? Is that good enough, or do you want more? It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
A little bit more. Well, I guess to come back on Glenn Beck's line, do you see this as fascism, or do you think that's overstating it a little bit?
Of course, it's fascism. Look, I said on Twitter, and I've said it in other places. Never in history have the people looking to ban books been the good guys. Never. Name one time in history where people who banned books were the good guys.
I can't name one. I agree with you on this. You shouldn't be banning Dr. Seuss books. I find it utterly ridiculous. And just a few, but I don't consider it fascism either. I think the fascism thing is way overblown. And better yet, let's hear Beck. Glenn Beck is going to make this argument that this is fascism. Let's play the clip, Andre.
They are banning Dr. Seuss books. How much more do you need to see before all of America wakes up and goes, this is fascism? This is fascism. You don't destroy books. What is wrong with us, America? Go out and buy those books today. Find out if you can get them. Buy Mr. and Mrs. Potato Head, because it's the end of an era. It is the end of freedom in America.
It is the end of freedom in America. Look, it was infinitely foreseeable that people were going to go out and buy those books. The moment that they came up with this nonsense that these books were going to be stopped to be sold. I think we're going to find a certain degree of agreement on this. I don't agree it's fascism. I don't buy that. I mean, it's people have their own proclivities about identity and everything else, and they can make those decisions for their own. This is their own estate making the choice. Nobody is burning the books. Nobody is stopping them from doing it. It's their own choice. I think it's a poor choice, but it's their choice. Why do you think, though, that this is fascism? Like, what is the thing to you that you say, this is an aspect of this that makes this a fascistic thing?
Because fascism is literally saying, if you disagree with me, you can't be heard.
Who's stopping them from being heard? They're making the personal choice to not sell the book. Nobody, meaning the government is not stopping them from selling the book. The government is not burning the book. They're just saying, and again, I think they're wrong for saying this, or I think they're wrong, but there are certain stereotypes in the books that they don't necessarily like. Now, the thing is, the guy is anti-racist. So the guy wasn't even racist. And if you, as a parent, want to come back and say, you know, here are these books, understand these characters, you know, these are horrible caricatures and everything else, do your thing. And the very fact that people can now sit back and say, we want to get rid of these books, shows at the very least there's an impetus to understand that the characters in the books might have been portrayed in these kind of horrible racist terms. By the same token, the very fact that the people understand that shows the premise that you don't need to get rid of the books. If that makes sense.
Exactly. No, listen, the whole point is that things were different in history. If we're going to judge everybody by 2021 standards, then you got to cancel the founding fathers. You got to cancel the whole first couple hundred years of this country. Everybody who was, great, they lived in a certain time. If you're born in a time, there might be a time, there's no way for me to relate this and not sound horrible, but there might be a time in the future. Of course, we're talking about human beings. It's a complete different ballgame.
Yes.
But there may come a time in the future, 100, 200 years from now, where they say, can you believe those people kept animals confined in their homes and called them pets? They were horrible. Let's cancel every one of those people.
100%, 100% agreed. Yeah, I mean, if we're going to, like you're saying, are we going to cancel our entire past? And then if we take the future into account, are we going to cancel our present? And then if we take the far future into account, are we going to cancel our future if we just assume that things continue as they have been and ethics change and we see this idea of ethical development? It's a weird use of the word cancellation because you can't actually cancel the facts. You can't actually strip away the reality of what happened. And you're going to have a hard row to hoe, a tough row to hoe, if you try to even, remove people's access to this information. But what's striking to me, and this, you could, if you're thinking that the company responsible for making these decisions is playing like 13D chess or something like this, but they sold more books. So what happens pretty much inevitably is you get people, resentfully resisting the diktat of a relatively small group in society that wants to
those books. Yeah.
pull this stuff away. And that seems like it would continue. And so I'm worried that it's like a finger trap. The harder you try to pull out, the more stuck in it you are, or a sandpit or something like that. It doesn't even seem to work as a tactic. Carmine, what's your take?
I agree. And people are now going to want to read these books to see what was going on with them. And I'm sure you can find copies on the internet, that you can read. They're going to want to see what was in them. And so all the objectionable material you were so scared about people seeing, hey, guess what? We know slavery happened. We know oppression happened. We know Jim Crow happened. We know it happened. So hiding it from us doesn't change that it happened. And now people are going to want to see these things. And so now you've made people want to see these things that probably would have never cared before.
Well, right. And I agree with right there. They would have never known. They would have never cared. These were lesser known books. And these guys have thrown these things into the public spotlight. And like you said, they're going to be bought up. I wouldn't mind even buying them. Just, just to have them in the collection. Because I disagree with this premise, right? Why do you think they do this? I mean, and we have about 30 seconds. And I apologize, I asked this with 30 seconds. What do you think, from your perspective, that they're trying to accomplish by doing this type of stuff? Because like you said, slavery existed. We know about it. We know about Christopher Columbus. We know about these horrible things in our past. What are they trying to accomplish by scrubbing some of the other lesser elements?
It's just pressure. It's just saying, hey, look at us. Look how we're good guys. We're the good guys. That's all this really is.
It's virtue signaling. Basically, mass virtue signaling. Yeah.
I mean, we got to close it out here. I want to make one more quick comment on this, but Carmine, thank you for being with us. One last comment here. It's the Streisand effect, but it cuts both ways. On the one hand, you were bringing more attention to the books by trying to ban them, and that would appear to go against the interest of the people who published the study. On the other hand, we're now having a conversation about to what extent Dr. Seuss was racist, and I think that conversation can be seen as a victory by the people who are pushing this. So in a weird way, it both hurts, the response from Dr. Seuss, the response from society, it both hurts their cause and it helps it. And I'm worried that conversation, not that I want to shut it down or stop having it, I'm worried that conversation is adding fuel to the fire, and it's just going to keep on going. But while it keeps on going, we got to keep on talking about, we got to keep confronting it. Anyway, Carmine, thank you for joining us. And for those listening, that was the voice of Carmine Sabia, writer and editor at large at SabiaReport.com. You can follow him on Twitter at Carmine Sabia. Check out the Carmine Sabia show by going to SabiaReport.com and subscribe to his feed on rockfin.com/SabiaReport. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back on the other side of this short break with our next guest, Miko Pellet. Be right back.
Fault Lines.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Fault Lines.
Well,
and we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we're talking about Israel and the Palestinians. The International Criminal Court, the ICC, has launched a war crimes probe into Israel's practices in the Palestinian territories against Palestinians. We're also going to be talking about with the relationship between Israel and the Palestinians. Miko.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me again. I'm from Israel. I was raised, born and raised in Israel in Jerusalem in a very Zionist family. The title of my book that you mentioned, The General's Son, is the memoir. So my father was a general in the Israeli army. He retired after 1967, and I come from a very patriotic Zionist family. So we have, besides my father, who was a general, I have grandparents and uncles and aunts who played very prominent roles in the establishment of the State of Israel, signing the Declaration of Independence. We even have a president in the family and so forth. So when I talk about Zionism and Israel, I talk from a place of, not that I took a college course or anything, I read a book, but I was there listening to the conversations, hearing everything around the dinner table, and being educated and indoctrinated to become a Zionist, to be a Zionist. So that's my background.
Miko,
okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Shane.
Well, okay, I hear you. Let's get into the conversation about the ICC and this probe. Netanyahu has responded sharply, saying the state of Israel is under attack with this ruling. How do you see that? First of all, what do you think is going to come from this investigation? Second of all, what weight, if they say that there were war crimes, what weight does the UN actually have? Does the ICC actually have to level against Israel in its relationship with the Palestinians? And then third, how is this going to affect Netanyahu at home? I'm guessing it would strengthen him, but Miko, what's your take?
Well, first of all, these things take a very long time. This is a very slow process, as we've seen in the past. These things take a very, very long time. Now, there are so many steps between the decision to investigate and actual, prosecution if they find the crimes were committed. Some of the things that come to mind are, first of all, the political pressure. Blinken, the Secretary of State, already came out, denouncing this decision. And Israel, I doubt that Israel would allow the ICC people to actually enter the country and conduct their investigation. And then what happens if they do? What happens if they don't? So there's a whole lot of things that have to happen. But the decision, the declaration, is a very important step in the right direction. It's clearly the right thing. It's clearly, I think it was inevitable, because the crimes, Israeli war crimes and crimes against humanity, are so egregious, and they are so open. In other words, Israel doesn't hide, and bomb Gaza that it bombs Palestinians and kills civilians. It doesn't hide the fact that it denies people water. I mean, everything is done in broad daylight. Everything is broadcast. Everything is out there. They pride themselves, especially when elections come up. Every politician prides themselves of how far to the right they are, and how uncompromising they are when it comes to the Palestinians, and how tough they're going to be, and so on. So that's the discourse, and that's the reality. So I think this was inevitable, that at some point somebody's going to say, okay, well, we have to start investigating this. This is absurd. And we're at that moment right now. What happens from here on, we'll have to see. But you're right. I agree with you that for Netanyahu, this is the big win, because he knows how to deal with these things. He's a trusted, experienced leader. He speaks, he knows how to talk to the Americans, and he managed to get the Americans to practically do the impossible, or what was considered impossible, which was to recognize Jerusalem as the capital city of Israel, to close the Palestinian diplomatic mission in Washington, D.C. I mean, things that nobody thought were possible, Netanyahu was able to achieve. So I think his victory is pretty much in the bag.
So the person who's running this, the inquiry, Fatau bin Suda, said the court will look into crimes within the jurisdiction of the court that are alleged to have been committed since June 13th, 2014. The Gambian lawyer added that the investigation will be conducted independently, impartially, objectively, without fear or favor. Without fear or favor is the interesting part. Now, under the Trump administration, the United States was basically going after the ICC, attacking the ICC. Basically making the point, because the ICC was trying to investigate crimes that was taking place in Afghanistan, because Afghanistan is a signatory. It's the issue with the powers. What powers are at their disposal to do anything, even if they found a litany of crimes? Because like you said, Israel don't hide their crimes. I mean, they kill, 80% of the people were killed in those bombing raids. I think this was several years ago, while the United States was still sending weapons. This was under Obama. And you had just recently at the protests where they were shooting people in the knees and the groin and in the head, the idea of crippling and killing almost in this kind of systematic way. So it's not a situation where they hide their crimes. So how and what powers does the ICC have to do anything about anything that Israel does, even if their crimes was given to them on a civil platter? How could they make any changes? How can they affect anything?
That's a really good question. I don't know that anyone has the answer to that. I mean, they need to actually come into the country and investigate. They can't do it remotely. Israel controls all the entrances and the exits. Nobody can enter any part of the country without Israeli approval. And so there's no way that they can just show up. They can't come in, be dropped from a plane or enter through a tunnel. They need Israeli approval. I mean, theoretically, they could go into Gaza through Egypt, but the Egyptian government collaborates with Israel on this issue. So who knows? I mean, nobody knows. Israel is still, the United States foreign policy when it comes to Palestine, Israel, the Arab world, Iran, is still dictated by Israel. It's still a Zionist foreign policy, and we don't. That's not. Doesn't seem like it's going to be changing anytime soon. So it's impossible to tell. I mean, it's impossible to tell just how what the ICC will be able to do or not be able to do. But I think the declaration, like I said, is a very, very important step.
And you've already. I want to come back to the election here in Netanyahu's trial, which again, Netanyahu under trial in 3 separate cases, all of which have to do with bribery and corruption. That trial has been postponed until after the election. You already said a couple of minutes ago that you see Netanyahu going on to win this election. What do you think about the trial being postponed? It would seem to me that if Netanyahu thought he could clear the air of these charges before the election, he would decide to go through with it. He'd want to get it out of the way because, again, it would clear the air. The fact that he isn't either means that it's going to be an ongoing thing, which is, probable, or that he simply wants to get reelected before he has to face these charges and potentially be convicted. On both of those counts, what do you think his thought process is, and how do you see those trials going when they resume, Miko?
Well, his only motivation is to survive and to keep his, to keep the prime minister's seat. So that's the only motivation he has, and he's very good at doing both. I mean, last election he basically lost, and the other guy was literally just on his way, on his way to becoming prime minister when Netanyahu managed to turn the tables. And so he's very good at this. He's got a few challengers, but I expect those challengers will end up working for Netanyahu, just like everybody who ever challenged Netanyahu always ended up working for him.
Well, to make it even worse, I mean, you had a weird situation. To make it even worse, you had a weird situation where Netanyahu was supposed to share leadership with the guy, if I'm not mistaken. Netanyahu was supposed to leave for like X number of months. The other guy was supposed to go for a few others. And I remember I was talking.
I don't think anybody expected.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what I was getting at. Nobody expected Netanyahu to leave that seat. Nobody.
It's all a question of maneuvering the system so that he doesn't end up going to trial. And also as long as from the minute elections are declared until the minute where the results of the election are told, and then all the way through negotiating a coalition, during all of that time, and this could, we're talking about it could be a year. He's still in power. He's still a prime minister. It's a non-functioning government. It's a lame duck government, but he doesn't care. He's still prime minister, so he still calls the shots. Now the negotiations begin, and nobody's better than him at negotiating. And so he's going to drag it another year, another 2 years, and he doesn't care if the whole elections every 6 months, a year, whatever it takes, as long as he stays in power and he stays out of jail. Those are the only 2 motivations. And again, people actually forgot. I mean, when you look at the Israeli papers, you don't see any mention of the trial. It's been, I don't know when was the last time I saw any mention. I don't know, maybe it was about a month ago, he actually had to appear in court for a few minutes.
Does he just dominate the press? Why is the press so compliant on this topic?
Because there are other things that are more interesting that the public doesn't care. So he stole a few $100,000, and so he influenced the newspaper, and he got a few bottles of champagne. Big deal, in the big scheme of things. That's not the most important thing. Now, if you compare that to the value that he brings as prime minister.
Miko, we're going to have to end it here because we're coming up to a hard break. But I really do appreciate you coming on the show. You always give us very informative every time you come on. The guest, the voice that you guys were listening to is Miko Peled, human rights activist and author of The General Son, Journey of an Israel in Palestine, and Injustice, the Story of the Holy Land Foundation 5. You can follow Miko on Twitter at Miko Peled, buy his books on Amazon, and learn more about him and his work by going through MikoPeled.com. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is time now for the last hour this morning of the most disruptive show covering news, events, and politics across the surface of our divided country and across the surface of our divided globe. In the Independent Corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the ever vigilant, the context to the American perspective. Your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Hope everybody's morning continues to go well. I want to give a quick rundown of the show so far, so if you're just tuning in, you can catch up. At 7:45 a.m. Eastern, we spoke with Andreas Peter about Alternative for Deutschland, Germany's third most popular political party. Their designation as a suspected extremist group by German intelligence, which will now be surveying them statewide. Not politicians, they've said, but nevertheless, that's ongoing. Again, that was 7:45. At 8:15, we spoke with Carmine Sabia for a good half an hour first about congressional hearings on January 6th, as well as sort of comparing the events of last summer and the events on January 6th. We continued with a conversation about Dr. Seuss getting deplatformed. That was at 8:30. Really 8:35 as the first conversation spilled over. Then, just now, we finished up our conversation with Miko Paulette at 8:45. We were talking about the ICC, the International Criminal Court's investigation into human rights abuses, war crimes, really, against Palestinians by Israeli authorities. We also talked about Netanyahu's reelection prospects and the ongoing criminal case against him on charges of bribery and corruption, a case which has been postponed until after the election takes place later this month. And now we're getting back into headlines. First up, in COVID news, at least 2,369 new coronavirus deaths and 66,714 new cases were reported yesterday in the United States. Over the past week, there has been an average of 64,409 cases per day. That's a decrease of 17% from the average 2 weeks earlier. As of this morning, more than 28,804,000 people in the United States have been infected with the coronavirus, and over 518,000 have died from it. On Thursday, the World Health Organization said the number of cases in Europe is now rising after 6 weeks of decline. Last week, the number of cases rose 9% to just over 1 million. Authorities said they were seeing a resurgence in Central and Eastern Europe, with new cases also on the rise in Western Europe, where cases were already high. Going back to the states, in national political news, the U.S. House of Representatives canceled a session scheduled for today following law enforcement warnings of a possible plot by a militia group to organize another breach of the U.S. Capitol. The Capitol complex is ringed with non-scalable, barbed wire-topped 8-foot fences and is still guarded by hundreds of National Guard members. As a result, the House moved the intended session to Wednesday night, last night, in which they successfully passed H.R. 1, a sweeping government and elections reform bill. H.R. 1, known as the For the People Act, would overhaul government ethics and campaign finance laws and seek to strengthen voting rights by creating automatic voter registration and expanding access to early and absentee voting. The House also passed the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. The legislation would ban chokeholds and overhaul qualified immunity protections for law enforcement. President Biden has agreed to lower the income cap for stimulus checks. Adults who earn less than $75,000 per year will still get the full $1,400. What he changed is instead of it being a sort of scaled rollback up to the point of $100,000 in income, basically $1,400, the value of that check diminishing, the higher your income got up to $100,000. That cap has been lowered to $80,000, just $5,000 higher than the $75,000 lower limit. People who earn more than $80,000 will get nothing. The House passed the bill last week and will have to ratify the changes. Other changes to the bill include scrapping a $15 federal minimum wage, $140 million for a California rail project, and $1.5 million for the Seaway International Bridge between Massena, New York, and Canada. I'm going to push back against myself slightly because I didn't know exactly how Jamarl would respond, but I try to be fair with this stuff. I am critical of the California rail project. I think the train that they're planning wouldn't go fast enough, and it's been going on, the construction, the planning at the very least, and construction has been going on for like nigh on 13 years at this point. A bunch of money has been spent, not nearly enough has been done. On the other hand, I'm critical of it, but on the other hand, $140 million out of, $1.9 trillion stimulus bill, I don't even know, that's a very small proportion of the larger bill. So I can see people criticizing it. This isn't related to the pandemic. They're throwing it into this larger omnibus bill. There's criticism to be made there. And I would criticize the project itself. On the other hand, it's not like a large fraction of that. So I don't know. Jamarl, what's your take? We already talked about this, but what do you think?
I'm almost inclined. They've given more away in taxes over the course of God knows how long. Whether it's the money giveaways to Wall Street, whether it's the giveaways during the Obama era, where he enshrined 80% of George Bush's tax cuts into law, whether it was Bush's grotesque tax cuts, whether it was Trump's grotesque tax cuts. I mean, there are things. I have no issue with us investing in public-private partnerships, depending upon the partnership and depending upon whether or not the public is going to get something out of it in the end. Meaning, the public should get a kickback in the same way that businesses get a kickback when they're working in some kind of enterprise. In the case of the California thing, yeah, there should be standards and there should be very strict guidelines on those things and finishing those projects. Like have a project going for 20 years is absurd. The F-35, they spent like what, 1.5 trillion on a lemon. Some of these things are lemons. There should be consequences when that money for the federal purse is spent in ridiculous ways where people don't get their money's worth for it. But I don't have a huge issue with a train, let's say that's going, a high-speed rail train that we're building. Or, I don't know. I don't want to build any regular trains, though. Build something that's phenomenal, build something that's awesome, build something that's cutting edge. Don't waste money. So.
Well, that's my criticism. I mean, we've talked about the Hyperloop before. I don't want to spend too much time on this one part because there's just a lot of other important stuff to talk about. But Elon Musk, when he was talking about the Hyperloop traveled at what speeds, like 700-800 miles per hour, something like that.
Some obscene amount of speeds, like because the friction is not necessarily there, and it just sends it on. It's kind of electrical. Hell, you don't even need a Hyperloop. You could use current maglev technology to do that. Like high-speed rail, high-speed trains. It's floating on a pillar of a magnetic field, and the thing is going through. You can do all sorts of interesting things. They just don't do them. And look, I know this gets into like a capitalism argument, but the thing is, when you have money is a chain for some of that stuff. You have the capability to do it. You have the people to do it. You got the materials to do it. You can't put the money there for whatever particular reason to get it done. And that's always aggravating.
Here's what I'm saying. I get you. No, completely. But the max speed on the thing that they've been building since 2008, the thing that they've been planning, and it was approved in 2008, and they've been building it for quite a while since then. $9 billion bond originally.
Are you serious?
And that was just for the initial leg of the network. That was $9 billion. The top speed for it is 220 miles per hour. My point is they can do better.
Yeah.
And they could have done it faster, and they should have. And that's what I want. I'm not opposed to the government spending money on things. Like within reason. You just need to make sure they're run well, and you need to make sure they're going to be like, if you're building a big infrastructure project, do it right.
Yes.
In terms of my personal life, in terms of my larger, my politics and stuff, I'm completely in favor of that stuff. But I want to make sure that it's done efficiently, it's done well, that it works, and that you are upping your standards. Because you need to, it's infrastructure. It's going to last for decades, if not centuries in some cases. You want to make sure that it works and it works well. And it's impressive because, and also, I'm spending more time than I wanted to. If in a part of building a higher tech project, you're engaging in research and development that will benefit other sectors of society and other instances in which you'd use the technology, frickin' go for it. You know what I mean? Because that's upping the standards for all of us, which is a good thing. It raises the water line of how successful our society is across the board. I'm critical of this project, but again, in terms of this bill, it's a small fraction. But
sounds like you should be critical.
We should get into them.
Because it shouldn't be taking that long to make a train.
No,
I'm
it's
just
that much money, and it's not even that fast.
There needs to be consequences for money spent like that on the public purse. I mean, maybe that's your issue. Like maybe if there was some, I don't know, secondary function that keeps track of the thing that's being spent and then has a consequence associated with it if it was not done in time. I don't know. That should be a way of legislatively, because I know your issue is I just don't want you to waste my money and my time. Just get it right if you're going to do it.
Well, because here's the thing, man. I am not a libertarian at heart. I like localism, and I like many, have concerns about giving government too much power, particularly when it comes to our personal lives and their ability to survey us and all that stuff. But I'm not a libertarian. I'm okay with these larger projects, and I'm completely on board with them being funded by the government. But one of the weird downstream effects is that if you have projects like this that take too long, they cost too much money, they don't get done, they don't work, that kind of thing, then you are lowering the public's trust in the government. And I want there to be a legitimate, sort of valid, justified trust in the government so that we can get more better projects done, if that makes sense. We got more headlines. I think we should go to them. The federal probe into Hunter Biden's tax affairs is moving ahead without any interference from President Biden's White House, as stated on Wednesday. Hunter Biden confirmed in December that his tax affairs stemming from his overseas business dealings were under investigation by the feds. The investigation also involves a laptop belonging to Hunter, crucially, which it's great that they're investigating this, but I wish they'd got to it during election season instead of having a universe-wide apparent blackout on all the main debate, all the main TV networks that were hosting the debates, where they were literally like dismissing this as Russian interference. Well, the DOJ is investigating it under a Biden administration. Is that Russian interference, folks, or is that just you repeating the same damn lies you've been telling for the past half decade? Anyway, the investigation is also seeking to determine if Hunter Biden and his business associates violated tax and money laundering laws. Documents retrieved from the laptop also linked President Biden to those deals. The Manhattan townhouse, where Jeffrey Epstein is said to have sexually abused underage girls, is set to sell for roughly $50 million. The 28,000 square foot neoclassical townhouse at 9 East 71st Street went on the market, along with Epstein's Florida mansion, in July. Proceeds from the sale of the mansion are expected to go to Epstein's estate, which has created a compensation fund to settle claims from his alleged victims. Wouldn't it be great if instead of going to fund compensating his victims is very good. I'm not trying to dismiss that. But like, shouldn't a lot of that money also go to preventing human trafficking and like the other things that Epstein was engaged in? Pedophilia, abusive kids. Does that make sense, Jamarl?
It does make sense, but don't you want to compensate the victims? I mean, I get that they could be future victims, but the future victims don't exist yet. The victims that are here now are. But I feel you. I know what you're getting at, though. It's like, hey, why don't we try to prevent this from happening again? But do you need the victims' money to do that, or is that just a function of government?
I hear you. I hear you. Let's get back to headlines here. In her time as former President Donald Trump's transportation secretary, Elaine Chao repeatedly used her position and agency staff to help family members that run a shipping business with ties to China. That's in potential violation of federal ethics laws and is according to an Inspector General report. The internal watchdog cited Chao for 4 kinds of ethics violations, including requiring DOT's, Department of Transportation staff, to help with personal errands and with marketing her father's biography. In defense of her actions, Chao's office sent a memo dated September 24th, 2020, citing, quote, anyone familiar with Asian culture knows it is a core value in Asian communities to express honor and filial respect toward one's parents, and this ingrained value of love, respect, and filial piety always takes precedence over self-promotion and self-aggrandizement, end quote. Chao announced her resignation January 7th, saying she was deeply troubled by the previous day's mob that attacked the Capitol. One quick note on her quote there. Is it also a value deeply ingrained in Asian culture that you're supposed to engage in the private use of your station to benefit your family? Is that what you're saying? Because it seems like she's trying to cover her butt, by making it about her cultural values.
When I read that, I thought I didn't get it either. I was like, wait a minute, is she saying that this is a cultural thing? That's such a weird statement.
Is she trying to hide behind that? And another thing, we didn't talk about this in the headline, she's also Mitch McConnell's wife. Just pointing that out. That shouldn't be the first thing that you bring up when you're talking about her, but it's a relevant thing to bring up. And it's interesting that Trump's DOJ declined to investigate her, which I would see as a move to protect McConnell. And I'm sure, if I'm right in that, McConnell is aware of that. And I wonder, how that affected Trump's relationship with McConnell. All valid questions, in my opinion. Internationally, in Myanmar, reports from the UN say 38 protesters were killed Wednesday by security forces. The latest death toll was gleaned from various sources, with Reuters reporting 18, the Associated Press citing 33, and the Irate, a news website run by Myanmar exiles, saying at least 28 had been killed. The UN Security Council is scheduled to meet behind closed doors on Friday, tomorrow, to discuss the matter. Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, has said she deeply regrets her government's unlawful investigation of Alex Salmond. The leader defended herself against accusations by her predecessor that she misled Parliament during her opening statement yesterday morning. We'll be coming back on that soon. But with that, those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we're going into a break. We'll be rejoined.
Fault lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
Fault lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can send us a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. One of the interesting things that has come out, I've had my qualms with Elizabeth Warren, and that's to put it mildly. I have a litany of videos going back, talking about her behavior during the campaign, the undermining of Sanders during the campaign, and that was back in 2016, and most definitely 2020, where she basically repudiated super PACs until she needed the super PAC to stay in a race, to stay in that race to Super Tuesday in order to ensure that Joe Biden crosses the finish line by undermining and cutting into the vote total of Sanders. I'm not bitter about that at all. I'm just mentioning that to say that I've had my qualms with her. That said, Warren is doing something that I actually agree with and that most of America agrees with right now, a wealth tax. Now, Mrs. Warren wealth tax would apply a 2% tax to individual net worth, including the value of stocks, houses, boats, and anything else that a person owns after subtracting out any of the debts above $50 million. It would add an additional 1% surcharge for net worths above $1 billion. It is co-sponsored by two Democrats, Jamarl, basically the person who's put Medicare for All from the House, and leading the Progressive Congressional Progressive Caucus, Brendan F. Boyle of Pennsylvania. Now, Warren is trying to push her colleagues for this. And while America thinks this is a great idea, including a majority of Republicans, business groups, Republicans, Democrats are basically horrified. And Joe Biden, who's keeping his promise to the money interest that not much is going to change, hasn't necessarily responded. But it's not like he's going to respond favorably. To have a conversation on whether the wealth tax is a good idea, whether there's better ideas, we're going to have a conversation with Richard Wolff, one of my favorite guests, professor of economics emeritus, University of Massachusetts Amherst, and visiting professor in the graduate school program in international affairs at the New School University, New York City. He's founder of Democracy at Work and host of their nationally syndicated show, Economic Update. His latest book is The System is the Sickness, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself, and is available with other books, Understanding Socialism and Understanding Marxism. Professor Wolff, welcome to the show, man. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. So, the wealth tax. Now, it seems like a good idea on its face. And basically, 1 penny for everything over $50 million, give or take. That seems like such a tiny, tiny, tiny amount. But it's going to raise over, $3 trillion just because of the amount of wealth that these people have. Is this a good idea? And are there better ways to try to appropriate the wealth as opposed to trying to rip it out of them after the fact?
Well, let me begin 2 ways. First, to be brief and answer your question, yeah, it's not only a good idea, it's a very old idea. It should have been done long ago. It does exist in other parts of the world without any problems. It's easy to administer. There's lots to say for it. But the second thing I want Americans to understand is that we already have wealth taxes in the United States. but they are extremely unfair. Let me explain. The way we fund government at the local level, cities, towns, even some counties in this country, is by using a wealth tax. We do not do that at the state level. We do not do that at the federal level. There we use taxes either on your income, money flowing into you, or on your expenditures, like a sales tax when you buy something and the price has added to it whatever the sales tax is. So it's only at the local level that we already have a wealth tax. And by wealth tax, I mean, because this is very important, a tax on the value of what you own, not on the money coming to you, that's income, not on the money you spend, that's an expenditure tax, but a tax on the wealth that you own. And what local communities in this country do and have been doing for many, many decades is to tax certain kinds of wealth. Above all, land, housing, residential housing, business structures, business inventories. Those are property, and taxes are applied to the value of the property in all of the American towns across our 50 states. So we've had tax on wealth. Let me give you a stark example. If you own a home anywhere in America and you rent it out to people, you pay an income tax on the rents that you get as an owner of the house, but you also pay a tax on the value of the house. That's a property tax. So you get taxed twice, once on the value of the property and once on the income that flows from it. So we've had wealth taxes. There's no one needs to raise their hands, as happens all the time, and say silly stuff about, gee, we can't go to this new idea. It's not a new idea. It's been the law and the practice in the United States for many, many, many decades. Now we get to the really interesting part. Is all property subject to the wealth tax that exists at the municipal level? Answer, and this is crucial, no. Some property is taxable, like land, buildings, the ones I listed a moment ago. But there are other kinds of property that is not taxed at the local level. And the key part here is stocks and bonds. Those are not taxed. If you have a $100,000 house located anywhere in America, you pay a property tax to the locality where that house exists. If you sell the house and you hold the $100,000 you get from selling it in the form of stocks and bonds, you pay zero property tax to nobody. Okay, this is crucial. So the only real issue.
Quick, I just want to come in very quickly to try to clarify this one. As far as I can tell, the sale, you basically, the tax on stock, the sale of stocks and bonds, that's the only time there is a tax, whether it's short-term capital gains or long-term capital gains. If you own a stock or a bond and then you sell it, that is when you're taxed on that stock. Unless you've got it parked in like a Roth IRA or something like this that keeps you from having to pay taxes on that. That's the only incident in which those are taxed. Is that right?
No, careful. We could, under the tax code of the Internal Revenue Service, if you sell a share of stock that you purchase, say for $10, and you sell it for $20, the difference, the capital gain, is considered a kind of income. You never pay tax on the value of the stock. For example, the $10 that you paid to acquire that stock, that is never taxed. If you hold it and you sell it for $10, it's your property. You've had it all along. You pay nothing. You only pay if the value of the stock goes up, and then only on the amount of increase, on the gain. And that is considered an income. That's why you have to list it on your annual 1040 IRS income tax form, because it's considered a kind of income. The wealth itself that generated the capital gain, you never pay a tax on. So it's really important to understand that the fundamental quality of our wealth tax system in the United States is grotesque. grotesquely unfair. It exempts stocks and bonds, which is the form of wealth that the richest amongst us own. 10%, the richest 10% of Americans own over 80% of stocks and bonds. To exempt those kinds of property from a property tax while you tax the home, the land, and so forth of the average person in this country who's lucky enough to have a home it's unconscionable. And if most Americans really understood what I've just said, which is, by the way, textbook analysis of our tax system, I think you would have seen what Elizabeth Warren is doing now. Decades ago, you would have seen that, my goodness, if you're going to tax the property that middle Americans have, if they have any, namely their home, it's the only important piece of wealth that most Americans can afford, if they can even afford that. If you're going to tax that as a kind of wealth, on what conceivable basis do you exempt stocks and bonds from a wealth tax? And last point, if you have stocks and bonds today, the chances are, if you know what you're doing, that you can earn somewhere between 2 to 5% safely right now. In other periods, you could earn quite a bit more than that. But let's assume,
and that's after inflation, to be clear.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. If you're really a wealthy person, you give your stocks and bonds to a hedge fund or to a capital manager. All major brokerage houses offer you that service, some for free, some charge you, et cetera, but they tell you basically, if you give us your wealth, this is what we will do. And they glibly say, we'll get you 2 to 5% or better. And they've mostly been able to deliver that. So if you keep in mind that lower level, the 2%, and you remember that Elizabeth Warren wants to tax it 2%, then basically this is a tax that does not affect your wealth, because even if you do so badly as only 2%, that gain each year pays your tax and leaves you with the same wealth at the end of the year that you began. So the idea that this is in some way an expropriation of the wealthy just gives you an idea of the, I'm going to be polite now, BS that is going to flood the airways to try to silence what Warren, and she's not the only one, are pushing for. And as I say, from the standpoint of economics, it's long overdue.
So, Professor Wolf, we've only got a couple of minutes on this side of the break. If that, I'll be brief. What would you make of the, as far as I can tell, the most prominent argument that would be rallied against this, which is that it would lead to capital flight? Can you briefly explain what that would be for folks, and then how do you merit that argument, Professor Wolf?
Very simply, there's no evidence to suggest that any of that ever happens in a significant way. And the reasons are very simple. If you run away from the United States because we put such a tax on, you're going to have to run to one of the other major areas where stocks and bonds are traded and held. And they already have this tax or are likely to have it in the next 2 or 3 years. So you're going to incur all kinds of inconvenience, all kinds of expense, but you're not going to escape from this at all. The United States is not in the advance in this process. We're coming with a caboose. We're coming up later than others. There's no incentive to leave. You can't escape from this sooner or later. This inequality and injustice is going to be fixed. And the sooner you get to it, the more this government will be able to have the revenue to take care of all the other problems that are impinging on us.
Thank you for that brief answer. We've got to go into a break. We'll stick with Professor Richard Wolff on the other side, coming back from this break. Professor Wolff, for those listening, is a professor of economics emeritus at the University of Massachusetts Amherst and a visiting professor in the graduate program in international affairs of the New School University, NYC. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back with Professor Wolff on the other side of this short break.
Fault lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
What do we want?
News, politics, and culture.
When do we want it?
Wait, we weren't finished. News, politics, and culture without the red and blue spin.
Okay, so now when do you want it?
Daily from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay, satisfied now?
Never. Tune in to Political Misfits on 105.5 FM in Washington, D.C. and on 102.9 and 104.7 FM in Kansas City, Missouri. Daily for our analytical fix. No surrender.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I am joined by my co-host, Shane Stranahan. Continuing to join us, is Professor Richard D. Wolff. He is a professor of economics emeritus, University of Massachusetts, Amherst, and a visiting professor in the graduate program in international affairs of the New School University, New York City. He is founder of Democracy at Work and host of their syndicated or nationally syndicated show, Economic Update, a great show. His latest book, System is the Sickness When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself, and is available with other books, Understanding Socialism and Understanding Marxism, at www.democracyatwork.info. Professor, again, thank you for joining us. I want to get into a contradiction that is built into our economic system, and it has to do with the minimum wage. Now, I am for an increase of the minimum wage, and the $15 an hour fight is a fight that's taking place right now. And Joe Biden is basically failing on that fight. He has the power to do it. He doesn't do it. 500,000 Americans have been killed. 29 million have been infected with the virus. And 40% of the businesses, have been destroyed. And Joe Biden still, for whatever particular reason, acts as if this is a normal series of politics and doesn't do what the American public needs and pass the $15 an hour minimum wage. In real terms, if this number was keeping up with inflation, it would be over $20. So 15 is a compromise. That said, the higher the minimum wage goes up, the more of an incentive it is for companies to automate. And, the moment that a burger flipping robot becomes $14.95, you're going to see a wave of burger flipping robots and a wave of people losing their jobs to those burger flipping robots. Same thing with stores. If you go into grocery stores now, I don't know the last time people been in one, you will see checkout stands made by robots. And the goal being to eliminate cashiers over the course of time, where those are the main standard and to get you familiar with it. Same thing with stores. You walk into a 7-Eleven, at some point they'll be able to hit your card. Whatever you pick up, you walk out, and you are basically hit with the cost. Cars, they're going to be automated. They may be even automated to the point of using the sun, no solar power, in order to move from point A to point B. I'm making the point that all of these things are being automated, and the moment that the employer cost gets to be the cost, or the employee cost, rivals the cost of the machine, or that matter, the technology comes into play and the human being loses their job. What's the workaround for that? Because it seems like that is just a contradiction that is built into it. I mean, whether that's shipping jobs overseas or whether that's finding the quote-unquote burger-flipping robot to do it for cheaper, how do we get out of that contradiction in our society?
Well, it's a great question. It's been a problem for capitalism for at least 300 years. And so some answers have emerged, let's call it, by people who face this situation. First, let me be clear. You're absolutely right. Your description is 100% accurate. If you wanted to summarize it in a pithy kind of statement, you can say that in capitalism, the worker is constantly confronted with the following choice. Either you accept low wages or you take the risk of having no wages at all. In other words, if you fight to improve the wage that you earn so that you can take care of your family and have a decent life and maybe even hope to realize the so-called American dream, if you push for higher wages, as you put it quite rightly, you create an ever greater incentive for the employer to replace you in a variety of ways, either by substituting a machine, a robot, as you put it, or what many companies have done, leave and go to a place where wages are lower, another part of the United States, another part of the Western Hemisphere, another place on this planet, or bring desperately poor people from other parts of the world who are hungry for a job for the same reasons you are, but they might accept a lower wage because they come from an even more impoverished situation. All of these have all kinds of problems associated with them, and so we live in that contradictory system. Well, what is the answer? Well, some people want to deny the right of the community to replace workers with machines. I don't like that answer because in the end, the whole point of the machine, at least in my mind, was to relieve human labor. We have machines so that work is less difficult, less arduous, less dangerous. And these are progressive, positive things. The bad part about it is that people lose their job. So then it becomes rational for us as human beings to ask a simple question. Can we get the benefit of greater productivity, technical progress on the one hand, without suffering the loss of employment and jobs and all the negativity that flows from that? And for me, the answer is so clear and so obvious that I find it troubling that other folks don't kind of wrap their heads around this. There are millions of jobs, we call that the service sector, that cannot be done by a robot. Let me give you some examples. If we're going to have a really good daycare system, if we're going to say to young people starting families that we're going to provide as a society the kinds of quality educational daycare for young children that will do two things: give them a leg up on their education for their future on the one hand, and free up their parents on the other to take jobs knowing that their children are properly cared for and are being educated. That's an enormous task. That can't be done by a machine. That has to be done by caring, well-trained human beings. And by the way, the same thing applies to providing a decent retirement for our elderly. I could go on. There are lots of kinds of jobs that need to be done by human beings. We have the capacity, we have the wealth, we have the know-how, we even have the experience to create jobs for those people who are rendered technologically unemployed by the advance of machinery. That's what we should be doing. If we don't do it, let me just finish this. If we don't do it, we create an obstacle to ourselves that we don't need. Workers will, of course, resist technological progress because they're made to pay the price. The way we have it set up now, the company makes more profit by replacing the worker with the machine. That's nice for the company, so they do it. They're not responsible in our society, those companies, to do anything about the person displaced from his or her job by the technology. So that person begins to resist because they're carrying all the cost while the employer gets all the benefit. That way of arranging things is crazy and produces the tensions in our society that could otherwise be resolved.
In my opinion, that is an optimistic take, and it is one that I'm not sure I'm not sure I subscribe to it, and here's why. Like you said, for 300 years at least, it's basically since the birth of what we've now what we've come to call capitalism, automation has been the name of the day. What we technology, to use that word, is for a long time sort of been synonymous with the process of automation, in which the value of what we do has been both replaced and improved by being able to use machines that can do it better. Whether it's rote tasks, as that has historically been, or increasingly, as we're seeing now with the development of AI, whether it's more involved, intellectual, and potentially, yes, emotional types of behavior. Coming back to your statement about child care and taking care of people's kids, I could see, not that far in the future, a company coming out saying, we have come up with an AI data set, we've come up with a tool that you can use, that your household can use, that will provide the most targeted and selective care, responding uniquely to the attributes of your child and helping them in a way that no human being could. And we have hundreds of thousands of hours that we put into this data set. It has been shown to be useful. It's been shown to be better than any human caretaker could be, basically. And I mean, we're human beings too. We're radio hosts. You're a professor. I could see exactly the same thing coming, exactly that same argument being made, whether it's a radio show that is more uniquely attuned to your listeners' tastes, or whether it is a teaching program that can respond directly to what your student already knows and what they're trying to learn. I can see those arguments being made. They're already being made, of course, in the case of law, where various companies are trying to come up with artificial intelligences that can navigate the fairly well codified systems of laws and precedents that we have set up. Those are still in their relatively early days, but that part of the fundamental distinction here is it's not just automation displacing rote behavior. It's increasingly the prospect, and for some, the threat that automation will replace what we have, up until this point, seen as uniquely human behavior, solving unique problems, responding to things in unique ways. What's your take on that argument? I don't mean to make it too personal.
And just to add something else to that, Shane. Well, just to add something else to that, the number of people who are going to be displaced. I mean, if you're thinking about automation in cars, for example, you're talking about deliveries, you're talking about truck drivers, you're talking about everybody that's driving an Uber, you're talking about all of these things are going to go away in a very short span of time as these companies say, you know what, we don't need that Uber driver. We don't need that Lyft driver. We don't need that trucker who needs to get all of this rest and everything else. All of those people are going to need jobs. And I don't know if those people want to do childcare. So, Professor, how do you take those arguments that the number of people that are going to be necessary and even the jobs themselves that seem to be irreplaceable at some point will potentially be replaceable, or at the very least have machine to assist in a way where the number of people that are needed becomes less? And all of those people are not going to work with kids or elderly folks.
No, I only gave those as illustrations. There are thousands and thousands of other ways of doing that. The history of the human race is a little different, in my view, from sort of what you've been saying. And let me explain. Number one, I don't believe, not for 1 minute, that what has replaced human labor has replaced it and done a better job. The best system for moving water long distance, Roman aqueducts that were produced thousands of years ago, modern movement of water is in many ways inferior to that. What an individual can do when carving a piece of wood can be in many ways a very different object from what is done by a computer-driven lathe, etc., etc. We do not have a one-way direction of from less to better. We have a complicated substitution of machines, and we pay a price in the quality and in the personal experience of what work is, number one. And that's been true of every system. We get a particular kind of technical progress, but the notion that it's all upward and onward, that's a nice conceit of the people who like technology, but I don't think it's warranted by the historical record. Number two, history teaches us that we are also always developing new tastes, new desires. If we can get something done by a machine that used to take our labor, we have plenty of other things we can do, want to do, may not have allowed ourselves to do, may not even have imagined in the past. What kind of activity artistically could be unleashed in the United States if we had people and we said to them, okay, we have a technology that means you don't have to drive a cab all day, you don't have to drive an Uber. Do you have some artistic interests that you could pursue that would have a social benefit in terms of, I don't know, decorating the city, reconstructing gardens where they don't exist right now, etc., etc.? I have no doubt that the American people, or for that matter, any people, can come up with useful things for people to do so that we can give them jobs and incomes that help the society, even as we replace drudgery and rote activity with machines. The false dichotomy is to think that the only way we can enjoy the benefits of technological progress is by sacrificing the people whose jobs are removed. That creates a conflict that we don't need to have. We could get the benefits of technology, but we would need to adjust our society so that the commitment to human beings, that they have meaningful work, that they get a proper income for the work they do and can hold their heads up high and live like everybody else. That's something we could do. It's only capitalism as a profit-driven system that blocks us from doing that and thereby creates in masses of working people the resistance to technological change. You know, there's a famous group of people 200 years ago. They were called the Luddites in England, and they were replaced by machines. They were weavers and people who made textiles. And so in their upset and anger at being the sacrificial victims here, everybody was supposed to get a benefit out of installing these machines. So they asked a simple question: if the society benefits by machinery and we lose our jobs, wouldn't it be reasonable to ask the society to help us find alternative ways to earn an income and to be useful members of society? A perfectly reasonable answer. And when the capitalists refused, they smashed the machines. That's where the phrase Luddite or machine smasher comes from. It was not the right response, but you can understand why they felt that way, because they were being made the sacrificial lambs through no fault of their own.
Yeah, Professor, we're going to have to end it here, but yes, I agree with you. And the last one, I agree with you. I guess the question and the problem, I think, is a societal one, and it's one of consciousness. If we can accept that, look, we're going to get rid of the horse and buggy, that car, we're not going to need a person behind it, we're not going to need that person dropping French fries. Those are positives, believe it or not. In my point of view, they're positives. I mean, the negative comes in where society can't deal with the fact that some people may not have to do a particular job, in which case it's like you must find something else. You must sell your labor. You must work at some plantation, whatever that plantation is, even if you're not needed, because the resources are already there to basically pay people that need to pay them, and the technology is there to basically do the jobs. Yeah, it's a contradiction, I think. It's a hard problem. But I think the hard problem is only because of the way we look at the problem. So I thank you for giving your opinion on it. And I know we're pushing back on this, but we're pushing back because we like to get you to push back harder, if that makes sense. Because your point of view is so apt on this stuff, and I always appreciate you coming on to the show. So really, thank you very much. The guest that you guys are listening to is Professor Richard Wolff. He's a professor of economic emeritus, University of Massachusetts Amherst, and a visiting professor in the graduate program in international affairs of the New School University in New York City. He is founder of Democracy at Work and host of their nationally syndicated show, Economic Update. His latest book is The System is the Sickness: When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself, and is available with other books, Understanding Socialism and Understanding Marxism, at www.democracyatwork.info. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back with the wrap.
Fault Lines.
Want to know how international issues fit into local ones and how local issues fit into international ones, with the historical context to tie them together? Well, we're bringing it to you all by any means necessary. Tune in weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to hear me, Jackie Lukman, alongside my co-host Sean Blackman. By any means necessary, your guide to connecting the social, political, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. This is the last segment of today's show. That means it's the wrap. We're taking your calls, 202-521-1320. Again, 202-521-1320. We've got 4 callers on the line right now, but I think we've got room for at least one more after that. So please do feel free to call in. Let's go straight to Anthony from Detroit. Anthony, you're on the line. What's going on?
Hey, what's up, guys? Good morning. I just want to make 2 points real quick about the whole Dr. Seuss thing. So I'll try to be quick. One, because I was listening to the conversation. One, the idea is about the idea that was brought up
that he's just a product of his time, and any racism should maybe be excused for that reason. Seuss died in '91. The oldest book pulled from publication was put out in '76, the earliest in '37. There were plenty of people among Seuss's social class, making the point that racism is holding us back and a scourge on society. He very well had the capacity to understand and adopt that message at any point, and his slight shift is later in his life in messaging is only a reflection of that fact. To make the point a different way, just because factory farming is the status quo doesn't mean people engaged with it today are excused from culpability and their cruelty. So, and the second point, try to be real quick, is that if you're against these images not being printed anymore, you kind of have to understand you're arguing for the continued production, dissemination, and profiting off of caricatures, racist caricatures, molding the minds of our children. And where are the actual numbers and data on copies sold that say the amount of these books is so low? I mean, they may not be the flagship Seuss books, but any Dr. Seuss book will sell somewhere, whether it's in a bookstore, a secondhand shop, or a garage sale. So yeah, I'll try to.
Well, wait, don't go anywhere, Anthony.
Okay.
Those, I think it's a little bit different than factory farming, but I understand what you're saying. It's like they did this in the past because they did this in the past. They're still as culpable as if they were today. But I think you'd agree with me that the point of view of people in regards to race was far more coarse, far more harsh, and the things that were acceptable were far different. And it's not so much to say that those things were great. It's more to say that those things were. They just kind of existed, and those things are more like a time capsule in regards to the way people regarded that stuff. The thing is, the fact that the parents, or the fact that the kids, or the people can look at the books and say, there's a problem with it. How did those people get to the point where they can look at them and say, there's a problem with it, if the books crippled people and their ability to notice? I hope you get my point. Like, the public in a society can say that's a racist caricature without necessarily having to get rid of the fact that get rid of the book that shows that racist character. It's not that I'm like, yes, we should be printing racist material. That's not it. It's more so that I consider these things time capsules of the time. And if Dr. Seuss was making racist books or racist caricatures, and it's not the entirety of the book that was racist, it was the caricatures and everything else. He was a product of his time. So this is not a rah-rah, print more racist books. It's not that at all. It's more so kind of like that book existed, right. That was in the mind of the person, and the society itself saw this as being perfectly adequate at the time. And as society moves, society can say, we no longer think that's adequate. But do you really need to burn the book in order to get that across?
Well, could I go ahead and
go for
shoot
it.
Back at that?
Yeah.
I mean, because I think that's interesting. I think you would have a point if you were talking about a far removed society that wasn't. But we're literally talking like less than a century ago, for one instance. So like that's why I reiterate that the correct ideas were prominent. They were gaining prominence. So excusing the people that just chose the wrong side of the fence is really just excusing them. And although the books are being discontinued in publication, they're not literally being pulled from shelves. It's as far as I know. So you could really look at this as kind of like the Disney approach, where they said, "Oh, we're not going to delete these images from our old cartoons, but we're going to leave them for specifically the historical context and to examine them within the historical context." And most I just wanted to say also, and to call Seuss anti-racist is as bad is worse than Cory Booker co-opting the term, because that's a very specific term. He made he had some more
I don't think anybody called him anti-racist. I think they just said he wasn't racist.
I think you may have used that phrase earlier.
Did I? I used the term anti-racist?
No. There are other people that are saying he was anti-racist. You might have mentioned it, but there are other people
there's no way I use that term anti-racist. But okay, but go ahead. Yeah, I'm sorry, make your point.
I'm not sure. I heard it earlier.
Either way, it's the only point I'm just making that is that it's confusing the meaning, like the intended meaning of the people, the specific group of actual anti-racist activists. Because to be in my opinion at least, like to make my point, is to be anti-racist, you have to be anti-capitalist also, which he definitely was not. So it's like that. I just don't think that's the right term, but rather he made some more positive images also. That's the more accurate way to say it. And so yeah, that I'll stop myself from running off.
Thank you, man.
Anthony, this could turn into its own whole segment. I appreciate the call. We got other callers, so I'm not gonna respond. But thank you for the call. We can talk about this some other time. We have Tarif calling in from New Orleans next. Tarif, you're on the line. What's going on?
How y'all doing? Free Julian Assange, they got a petition passing around that's changed that all, saying UK Home Secretary must release Julian Assange from London's prison. It's up to 45,000. They're trying to make it to 50,000. So please sign it. And also, the information I got about Pfizer using a vaccine as an extension of the U.S. government policy towards Argentina and Brazil. I got it from the website. I got it from World is One News out of India. Is something like a CNN. Y'all can also go look at the tweet. Is WION. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say for today. Free Julian Assange. Yeah.
Tarif, thank you for the call. Agreed. They should free Julian Assange, and we're going to be talking about this more soon. Event coming up in a couple of weeks. We'll be talking about. Anyway, we got more calls. Let's go to Stedman calling in from Detroit. Stedman, you're on the line. What's going on?
Hey, so I just have a couple points. So I got to see Chris Wray speaking to the Senate Judiciary Committee a couple days ago at work. I didn't catch the whole thing. But one of the things that I heard him mention was that the Senate lawmakers should set limits on encryption and not private companies. So I thought that was very interesting. It really speaks to what I've been saying about free speech and the right to privacy and how this is going to be a snowball effect. A lot of people have brought up the Patriot Act 2.0. So another thing that was talked about was about them being domestic terrorists and how the FBI is going to focus on domestic terrorism. And this is really a dodge, right? This allows the FBI and the power structure to obfuscate responsibility and obfuscate what the actual answer is. Because the KKK isn't responsible for black people paying higher rates for insurance or for paying higher interest rates for loans on homes. The KKK is not responsible for black people going to jail disproportionately or black men being killed by police disproportionately. You may have KKK members on the police force or the military, FBI, whatever. But that's a product of the system. And no one is talking about the racial bias that is baked into the system from FHA loans, the GI Bill, redlining, et cetera, et cetera. King said that it took nothing to integrate a lunch counter, but it will take billions to make things right. I'm paraphrasing that last part. Okay. And so what you see is this is low hanging fruit, right? J. Edgar Hoover's name still sits on the FBI building, and they have a quote outside of Quantico from Martin Luther King. How do you justify that type of, I would call it a cognitive dissonance, this inconsistency, this incongruity within a nation that is ours, right? And then another point I wanted to bring up was just like when you look at the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, the steps that are being taken, Joe Manchin, Joe Biden, Mitch McConnell, and how, we see the play out with the $15 minimum wage, with lowering the limits for getting stimulus checks. Like, we can see that the Democrats and the Republicans agree 99% of the time. And so sometimes it confuses me because it seems like when Jamarl is speaking to the Democratic Party as if they don't understand what they're doing, right? He speaks to them as if he's going to be able to convince.
No, the reason I do that is ridicule. I ridicule them by their own position. That's why I do it. It's not so much that I believe it. It's more so that if you set a standard, I can hold you to the standard that you set. It's just basic ridicule. It's just basic politics.
And Will, I'm sorry, man. Will from Chicago, you were the one who gave us the tip on the hunger strike. Please call back in. I'm sorry we didn't have time to get to you. We got to close it out here, folks. Stedman, thank you for the call. Thank you to all of our callers this morning, and thank you to all of our guests. Great interviews. Thank you to Jamarl Thomas. Thank you to our producer, Mary T. Thank you, engineer Andre. We'll be back tomorrow, folks, with our last day of the week. Signing off, Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
It's Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Another one in the record books. Signing out. Yeah, we had a pretty decent show today. Really interesting guests. Look, I'm going to say like, I am going to say share. I am going to say subscribe. Yeah, I don't know who said anti-racist. Poke would somebody say anti-racist. Anti-racist is a weird word for me to say. That's why I don't think I said it. Unless, what's his name said it. He was trying to make the argument. And yeah, you're right. That's a very specific term. If I was the one who said it, it's not what I meant. I just meant he wasn't racist. He was, but anti-racist is different. All right, I'm going to say thank you. I'm going to say like. I'm going to say share. I am going to say subscribe. Zeki Chow, I think Jamarl is speaking to the people who are opening their eyes but still duped. Look, here's the thing. If I'm cynical about American politics and about what people push and why they push those things. I didn't vote for Joe Biden. I didn't vote for Joe Biden because I thought Joe Biden would do exactly what Joe Biden is doing. And that basically is lying about what his position was in order to get into office. That he was the same person that he was for the 47 years. By the same token, if Joe Biden comes out of his mouth and says, I'm going to back $15 an hour minimum wage, I'm going to attack him when he doesn't. He set the standard. He said it. And if there are some people who are not entirely aware of politics, and let's say they were like me when Obama was in office, and they're like, that guy has a point. Why is he doing that? And hey, that guy has another point, that it seems that this happens every year when these guys are getting elected. Yeah, I want those people to be able to see it as it happens. And when I castigate them or ridicule them for something that they've taken as position, what else are you supposed to grade them on, right? I can't hit Joe Biden on Medicare for all because Joe Biden never said he was going to pass the Medicare for all. If Joe Biden said I'm going to pass a public option and he doesn't pass it, yes, I can hit him with it, whether I believe he was going to do it or not. So it's not this notion of belief. It's the notion of ridicule. What is it called? I can't think of the name of the book. But it doesn't matter. I'm going to say like, I'm going to say share, and I'm going to say subscribe. Thanks, guys. And I'll see you a little bit later. In fact, I'm going to see you a little bit later today. I'm actually going to be on Political Misfits today. That's going to be weird, being back on the old show. But I'm going to be on that show, on their Trends episode, talking about UFOs. So it should be a very interesting show nonetheless. But all right, guys. I'm going to say like, share, and subscribe.